been closed. Anything that could be a further terrorist target is now being closed down as New York City and apparently the Capitol go into a high terrorist alert. There's also a new report right now, you're not going to believe this, of a fire on the Washington Mall. So there's now 2 targets in the Washington area. First the Pentagon, and now a fire on the Washington Mall. There's no indication what has caused that fire, but the Washington Mall is on fire. Expect further evacuations of buildings in Washington, as well as further evacuations of buildings here in Manhattan. That's all I have to report. Back to Michael and Lisa.
Quite a lot there, Marcia. Thank you. Washington Mall, of course, a big tourist spot there. If you look live at some of the tape, this is tape of apparently a casualty from the World Trade Center bombing.
From crews on the ground here, this is rather from the plane crash.
Yes, from the plane crash.
We had reports, one confirmed casualty. We don't think it's a reach to assume that there will be far more, in that 40,000 people work in the trade centers. As you look, only a live picture on your left as these as the fires continue to burn at the World Trade Center. This is unedited unedited videotape from the ground level.
Is this Beth Israel or St. Vincent's that we're looking at? We're trying to ascertain. Of course, St. Vincent's has already received dozens of people coming in. They're expecting hundreds of more. All the hospitals, Beekman Downtown Hospital, all the hospitals are on high alert as well, as you're expecting hundreds, possibly thousands of injuries. Again, ladies and gentlemen, in case you just missed it, the Pentagon has been hit by a plane. Witnesses saw a tail of a plane strike the Pentagon. As you look live at New York City's 2 Trade Center buildings on fire from 2 apparent airplanes going into it. One was, the first plane crash was from an American Airlines 757 out of Boston that had been hijacked. The second airplane we're trying to get beat on as far as what type of aircraft that was, also a large plane. Logan Airport in Boston has been closed because of it, as are all of our airports, no doubt, our subway system as well. As we look live on the right side as well, that is flames and black smoke billowing from the Pentagon as that aircraft was hit just a few moments ago, 9:40 this morning.
Should point out as well that there's also a fire reported in the Washington Mall. No confirmation as to the cause of that. And the west wing of the White House and the Capitol buildings have been evacuated amid the concerns over terrorist threats. Sure. You heard the president addressing the nation briefly just moments ago after only the 2 plane crashes. I shouldn't say only, but before we had word of the Pentagon plane crash. He spoke to the country briefly. We have those remarks for you. Perhaps we can take a listen, and if you're just joining us, you can get caught up with what the president had to say.
Let's go to Michael Slattery live on the scene. Michael, take it away. John Slattery, I'm sorry. John? John Slattery. Are you ready? Okay, we were told John was ready. We're going to continue on with our coverage. As you look at a split screen, folks, at an unbelievable scene. Marcia Kramer, what's an update for us? She's in our newsroom.
Well, we just have a little bit more information, Lisa. Apparently that plane out of Boston that left Logan Airport had sent out a radio transmission, a probably coded radio transmission to air traffic controllers that it had been hijacked. That's why the FBI was investigating it, and eventually that was the plane that crashed, the first crash into World Trade Center 1. Again, the plane that crashed into World Trade Center 1 had previously sent out a radio transmission that it had been hijacked. But given the fact that Washington, the route from Boston to New York is a very small one, the FBI probably didn't have enough time to stop the plane before it crashed into World Trade Center 1. They simply didn't have enough time with the radio alert to stop the plane or get another plane into the air to head it off before it crashed into the World Trade Center. As we've told you, there are now three airplanes that have crashed into major landmarks in our country, 2 into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon. Again, there's a fire on the Washington Mall. We don't know at this time if the fire was caused by another plane or it was set by somebody on the ground. We're also closing New York City, and federal investigators are in a high terrorist alert. There's a no-fly zone over all of Manhattan. All the bridges and tunnels are closed. The subways in lower Manhattan have been closed. And there are other evacuations expected as this story develops. Lisa and Michael, back to you.
Okay, Marcia, you're recapping very well for us. So all of this happened unbelievably. It's starting right before 9 a.m. Mr. Bush is down in Sarasota, Florida, and he called this an apparent terrorist attack before the Pentagon was hit.
Talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. In the meantime, Rose Walia, one of our reporters, joining us now from what we believe is very near the scene. Rose?
Well, Michael, right now there is bedlam here at Bellevue Hospital. They're expecting many, many patients. So far, 2 have arrived here. It seemed that the injuries were minor. I was inside the hospital just a short time ago, and alarms were going off. Right now, they're on external disaster, a very high alert at this hospital. Everybody gearing up for this disaster. And here on the FDR, continuously there are sirens just whizzing by, police cars, fire department, and ambulances. And here, right across the street, we can see the plume of smoke coming from Lower Manhattan. Certainly very visible here. They're expecting, as I said, many, many patients. Could be thousands of patients, hundreds of patients. As I had mentioned, administrators scrambling for additional staff right now. It's crazy inside of the emergency room. Everybody's standing outside of the emergency room doors, waiting in anticipation for ambulances to arrive here. We'll have much more for you later on today. We're live at Bellevue Hospital. Rose Walia, CBS 2, back to you.
Okay,
Bellevue.
Rose, we want to know where we were. We didn't hear you. So we're still efforting John Slattery. Marcella Palmer also on her way down there, trying to set up and give us the latest details. We're going to check back with Rose in just a few moments. The FAA has shut down all aircraft takeoffs across the nation because of this. We just were told that, according to the Associated Press. The FAA has shut down all aircraft takeoffs across the country, nationwide, because of 2 airplanes hitting World Trade Center Tower number 1 and number 2, as well as the Pentagon being hit by an airplane some 12 minutes ago. On
the subject of the Pentagon, John Hatcher joining us now from Washington. John, we understand you had some of a view of what had happened. What did you see?
Well, about 9:30 or so, I heard a rumble that shook the windows in my apartment. So I went into my mom's room and I looked out the window, and I could see this huge plume of smoke going straight up into the sky. So I started freaking because of the World Trade Center.
And did you see, and then you saw the Pentagon?
Well, yeah, and then I saw on television that possibly a helipad at the Pentagon had been blown up. And the plume of smoke now stretches from the Pentagon southward towards on the Shirley Highway, which is, I live right next to the Shirley Highway in Arlington, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
All right, John, thanks very much. John Hatcher, a witness there near the Pentagon fire where the plane had struck there not too long ago. Right now, let's go turn our attention back to New York City and our own John Slattery, who's got an update for us. John? John, are you there?
Fine, I got it.
Go ahead.
Just tell me when, Jim.
Go ahead. We hear the alarms, obviously. It's going to be going on.
All right, I'm at the corner of West Street and Murray, and it's organized chaos here right now. We've got police who have been evacuating people from the World Financial Center, which is just across West Street from the World Trade Center. And as you can see, let's spin around here for just a second. What we've had here are thousands of people. Let's keep going around. Let's keep going around. We've had thousands of people who have been evacuated from various buildings around here. And what we heard about 20 minutes ago from a man who identified himself as a member of the White House advance staff, he came up to me and he said that he'd heard that a 3rd plane was coming in. Now, shortly after that, a police captain came up to me and urged us to get out of the area. We were about 2 blocks closer. He also said that their word from Washington was that a 3rd plane was coming in. Whether or not that is going to materialize, we don't have any word right now. But with that, what happened was everyone who'd been evacuated from the World Financial Center across the street and who were merely outside the building across the street were then moved about 2 blocks farther away. And in just about the last 5 or 10 minutes, all of the people, thousands of people who were gathered around me right here, were moved back at least another half a block. The police are trying to get a handle on just the crowd control here. And meanwhile, what we saw, if we can look up at the building, you've undoubtedly already seen this as well, but a number of people were apparently jumping from windows. We saw at least 5 or 6. One man told me that he knew of about 10, but an FBI agent confirmed 5, and then with a few minutes after that, we saw a 6th person jump out. So we're unsure as to how many fatalities might be involved in this, but in looking at the people who were standing there absolutely horrified to watch this, many people started screaming, many people started crying, there were people hugging each other, and every time they saw a person jump to his death, there were people who were just grabbing hold of each other and sobbing and wiping their faces and wiping their tears. It's an unbelievable scene here. If we can look around behind us, we've got, sir, could you please move a little? We've got a helicopter taking off over there, and what we were told was that this field was being set up as a medevac location. There are at least, scores and scores of. Now this one's coming in to a closer vantage point. We've had scores and scores of ambulances in the area here. That helicopter is in fact taking off. He was just circling around to get a better angle of attack on his takeoff. As far as the fire control, we have no idea as to what that situation is, but debris continues to rain down from up above, and as of about 5 minutes ago, we were still seeing fire on some of the floors of World Trade. Now, I saw the second plane hit. I did not see the first plane hit, but the second plane was an unmarked silver fuselage. It appeared to be twin engine. I couldn't tell if it was prop or jet, and it took a slight bank and went right into the side of World Trade II, and having had the first one go in, the second one obviously appeared to be a suicide flight. So the only thing that we can assume here is that they were both suicide flights going in, and as I said before, there's unconfirmed word that even a third plane was on its way here. The disposition of that, we don't know. Now, the studio, I can't hear you right now, but let me go back to you.
John Slattery, thanks very much. He's over at West Street, and Murray,
Lower Manhattan,
giving us our first account of things from ground level. Let's go back to the newsroom now. Marcia Kramer following the developments from that vantage point. Marcia?
Well, we're now getting some picture of the breadth of this national catastrophe. First of all, the White House was evacuated.
It will not progress from here, but one never assumed that we would see what we're seeing now. So we have no idea really what might happen next.
And if we can aid those who are trying to get control of this situation, if you're at home and if you're watching this, if you can stay at home, please do. We are...
Okay, you're looking at another explosion right here. This is another explosion.
Part of the tower coming down?
Part of the Twin Tower, obviously folding.
Coming crashing down. We're watching a live...
It is right...
We're watching a live picture of this. What?
It's live. You're looking at this live. You're looking at another explosion right in the same area. Oh, another explosion.
Trade Center number 2, the one that is on the south, that is difficult to make out through the debris and smoke, but it does appear that a portion, the top portion of the building, has collapsed down to the streets below.
Oh my gosh.
Unbelievable what we have seen here. The debris and smoke just covering the entire portion of lower Manhattan.
Oh my gosh.
Jim, we know this is terribly difficult for everybody. We're asking that you please stay with us, hold your shot, stay with us on audio. We should tell people our crews have been running from that scene, as have everybody, and the entire area has been under an evacuation for some time. And just moments ago, you saw it here live from Chopper 2, a horrific scene as one of the towers there appears to have collapsed from what had happened earlier. A quick chronology as you continue to look live. Just before 9 o'clock this morning, word of a plane crash into Tower 1 that had been confirmed. A 757 hijacked out of Boston was the first impact. 18 minutes later, a second plane impacted Tower 2. Not long after that...
Videotape of that second crash.
Not long after this second impact that you will see here on tape, happening 18 minutes after the first impact,
and then
was the fire at the Pentagon.
Right, about 9:30 this morning.
Also confirmed,
and this is the collapse. We're
from the
showing you,
Associated
this is the
Press.
collapse, ladies and gentlemen, on videotape. The collapse that just happened. Unbelievable.
Let's go to Marcia Kramer now in the newsroom as she watches what you're seeing at home right now. Marcia?
Well, the real concern right now for New York City emergency rescue squads is to get people on the ground away from that scene as soon as possible. If you live in the area, if you live in Battery Park City or any of the other housing developments in that area, you should leave the area. You should evacuate the area and get away from the scene. Right now, police have to determine is whether that explosion was caused from the initial impact of the plane or whether it was something that was exploded on the ground. Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate, obviously this is just early speculation, but it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself. But nevertheless, a collapse did happen, and they need to get as many people away from the scene as possible. If you live in the area, if you live in Battery Park City, the best thing that you can do for yourself to keep yourself safe is to leave the area as fast as possible. The important thing now is for people, emergency service people, all the firemen, the policemen, the EMS technicians to be able to get to the scene and to help as many people as possible, people who are still alive and people who possibly could be evacuated from the other World Trade Center building that's next door. They want to minimize the amount of loss of life as much as possible. Again, I can also tell you that the entire nation is on a terrorist alert right now. FBI offices all across the country are on alert. Washington, pretty much all of Washington has been evacuated. The White House, the State Department, the Capitol building, and the Treasury have been evacuated. Here in New York, the UN and the Stock Exchange have been evacuated. And in Los Angeles, it's on tactical alert. They are evacuating buildings in Los Angeles as well, mostly high-glass structures. And the FAA has ordered all airplanes, all airports across the country to close down. There will be no more air traffic because they do not want to allow any more planes to strike a target in our country. That's all for now. Back to you, Lisa and Michael.
All right, Marcia, we've been told that, of course, parents are concerned because there are some schools down there. There are 3 high schools that are down there. We've been told that the students are still inside and they are safe. Of the 3 high schools, we're trying to get the names of those high schools for you in that lower Manhattan area, but we're told that the students are safe, that they've been kept inside, and they are obviously being hunkered down as far as this is concerned. It's going to be very difficult, though, Michael, for anyone to try to find their way out because of all the incredible amount of smoke on the ground, much less trying to breathe through that as they try to make their way out. Again, stay away from the area. All the bridges and tunnels are closed coming into the city. This is an unbelievable scene. I don't think anybody ever could have imagined something as horrific as what we're seeing right now.
It continues to get worse, and joining us, Kyle Beard, who's an eyewitness, joining us now on the phone. Kyle?
Yes, hi.
What, did you just witness that collapse?
My neighbor and I did, yes, but I saw this second plane. I saw it coming in from the harbor, and it was United, and it looked like it was maybe a 757, a 767, one of the mid-range commuter planes. Mm-hmm. And it came in low. It was just over the river, just over the tops of the buildings, and then it made a deliberate turn right into the World Trade Center. And now we were just looking at my neighbors downstairs. That we saw just smoke, this huge amount of smoke when the building collapsed.
Sure, that's what we're seeing now.
And it's been over. I'm in the Carroll Gardens section of Brooklyn, and it's been like snow over here. There's just been pieces of charred paper, whole pieces of paper, shattered pieces of paper, but I did see the second plane. It came in very, very fast from the harbor, and it was going along the East River, and I thought, my God, it's going to brush the Brooklyn Bridge. Mm-hmm. And then it got just at the World Trade Center and turned, just the wing just bent, how do you call that? Dipped?
Dipped, yeah.
It just dipped and went right into the building.
Horrible
but
scene.
It was United, definitely, because it was the 2 shades of gray with a red stripe along the middle.
Okay, so you're saying United Airlines.
Kyle, we appreciate your insight, though we should reiterate to folks we do not have confirmation on that second plane. We do know that the first one was a 757.
You got to take in this picture, though, Michael, as you look live from Chopper 2. All of lower Manhattan billowing in smoke, in white and gray and black smoke. The entire lower Manhattan covered in what is a catastrophe of enormous magnitude, something that you and I never would imagine we would see in our lifetime.
Just moments ago, one of the towers collapsing on top of itself. Marcia Kramer with more now from the newsroom. Marcia?
Well, we now have a report that when that tower collapsed, it may have collapsed on another building, and that building is now either on fire or they're evacuating people from that building as well. So there's a third building involved in the World Trade Center area, which was hit by the debris and the steel and whatever else was coming out of the building from World Trade Center 1. Now, we want to tell parents that the students that are in the 3 high schools in the area, one of them is Stuyvesant High School, are safe right now, but parents who want to come pick up their children can come and pick up their children and get them home. Now, to give you some sense of how broad this is, I can tell you that in Chicago officials have now evacuated the Sears Tower. So now we have evacuations running from New York to Washington to Chicago to L.A. Again, all airports are closed. Also, the New Jersey State Police have now opened an emergency command center of their own in New Jersey to try to assist New York in trying to deal with this incredible, incredible tragedy. Now, for parents of students who go to schools in the area, there are, in addition to Stuyvesant High School, which is a high school for gifted kids, there are also 2 elementary schools that are in the Battery Park City houses. The children are said to be safe at the present time, but school officials are saying that if parents want to go to school and take their kids away from there, they are welcome to do so. Again, though, those children are safe at the present time. That's all we have for now, Michael, and Lisa, back to you.
There's also daycare centers on Wall Street, I know for sure, because my stepdaughter used to go to a daycare center right on Wall Street, right on Wall Street. And you got to worry about those small kids as well as the children at the elementary schools. But the word we're getting is that they're safe and they're being kept in school. But again, parents can come down and get their children if they so desire, which is completely understandable as you look at this scene. New York City, as you see from our breaking news bulletin, is on full terrorist alert. Planes have crashed into the building. The latest incident just happened a few minutes ago, right at 10 o'clock, where the top of the World Trade Center number 2 building, I believe, is that right, Michael? Or number 1 building. Number 1 building was the building that was hit by the bombing in '93. But the building has collapsed, and according to Marshall, we understand that it collapsed onto another building down below.
Nearby fires raging. Rose Walia at the scene near Bellevue Hospital with an update. Rose, what can you tell us?
Well, a lot of ambulances coming in and out of here at Bellevue Hospital, and they're expecting many more patients now that one of the towers has collapsed. You can see here on the FDR, they have actually shut it down to normal traffic. They're only allowing emergency vehicles through to Lower Manhattan at this point. And we understand right now administrators scrambling to find additional personnel. Right now, cell phones and the phones inside of the hospital are down, so they're having trouble communicating with their internal staff and to find doctors and nurses to come in and deal with this unbelievable situation. Here they are on external disaster, a very high alert at this hospital, but they're doing their best. Hospital administrators waiting outside, doctors and nurses waiting outside of this hospital, waiting for these patients to come here and get the best help as possible. Certainly a tragic situation. A lot of people here feeling very, very depressed and sad at the fact that a New York landmark has been destroyed in such a way. We're live at Bellevue Hospital. Rose Walia, CBS 2, back to you.
Okay, Rose. And the entire city in gridlock. Everybody's in a state of shock. New York City, an entire state of shock.
Again, just a reminder, if you're joining us now, you're looking at live pictures from Chopper 2 at the remaining tower, World Trade Center tower, that's still standing. The second tower there had collapsed just moments ago. Marcia Kramer still in the newsroom as we take a look at both the live picture and tape of the scene just after the, just as that tower, second tower collapsed.
That's on the left side of your screen.
Marcia, you have an update for us?
Well, yes. Now, a source is telling the Associated Press that the second plane that hit World Trade Center 2 may actually have been flying out of Newark Airport, which would have enabled it to get there very quickly and would have accounted for only the 18-minute gap between the crash into the World Trade Center 1 and the crash into World Trade Center 2. Again, we had the first plane that came out of Boston. It was apparently hijacked out of Boston, came and hit World Trade Center 1, and apparently now a source is telling the Associated Press that the plane that hit World Trade Center 2 had flown out of Newark Airport. The State Emergency Management Office is actually also being evacuated, and now state and local officials are trying to clamp down on exactly what their security plan is. For obvious reasons, they don't want to telegraph their moves to any terrorists that may be on the ground listening and trying to cause further upset to both New York, Washington, or any place else around the country.
We're looking at Thank you, Marcia. We're looking at a live picture on the right side of your screen. On the left side, in case you missed it, the second plane that went into World Trade Center Tower number 2. That's a replay of a tape on the left side of your screen.
Let's bring in a guest on our studio, Michael Hirschman. He is president of Decision Strategies, an international security and counterterrorism firm. Michael, what can you tell us that has not already been said from what we've seen?
Well, we know very little at this point about who's responsible for this tragedy. A lot of speculation, obviously, going on. It has the markings of a Middle East act of terrorism.
Why do you say that?
Well, often in the Middle East, when there's a bombing, a suicide bombing or a car bombing, you'll find a second bomb going off when the emergency response crews respond to cause maximum injury and damage. This is our worst-case scenario. This is something that has been talked about in the security industry over the years. This is something that has been planned for in terms of response, but it's still hard to imagine. And dealing with a tragedy of this magnitude, both from an investigative standpoint and from a response standpoint, is going to be virtually impossible.
Clearly, you can only do so much to prevent something like this, and as you had mentioned, a lot of the effort is put into response. What, aside from getting all your emergency personnel to the scene, can you possibly do as we look at it still unfolding live in front of you? The only remaining World Trade Center tower still standing. The second one has collapsed not too long ago. What can you do aside from just getting your emergency crews to a scene?
Well, there are two things going on right now. One is this is a crime scene, and the FBI obviously is in charge of the crime scene investigation as well as the police. That probably is not taking precedence at the moment over the rescue efforts. But nonetheless, they're there. They're collecting whatever information they can. And right now, you can imagine all of our intelligence agencies, both domestic and overseas, are tapping every source imaginable to try to find out who might be responsible. I just want to say that don't be surprised if no one claims credit. We're sitting here and asking ourselves who's responsible and who have we heard from. You may recall we've had other incidents in this country and other incidents around the world where no one claims credit.
Because the damage has been done and they're satisfied with that. They don't find it necessary to claim credit, I guess.
Michael, stay with us if you would. We want to go back to Marcia Kramer, who's in the newsroom, for a further update. Marcia?
Well, we have a number of updates. Number one, CNN is now reporting that there was a third explosion at the World Trade Center, probably an explosion from the ground that caused World Trade Center 1 to collapse on top of itself. Again, there was a third explosion. It's unclear what caused it, whether it was a bomb or whether the first plane that crashed into the tower had somehow been booby-trapped with a bomb that was timed to explode later after the crash had occurred. But CNN is reporting that there was a third explosion that caused World Trade Center 1 to collapse within itself and then collapse on other surrounding buildings. But you know, it's interesting here to reflect about the timing of this, what appears to be a terrorist attack. It comes just a few weeks before there was supposed to be a major world gathering of Jewish leaders on the 23rd of September that was supposed to be bringing in people from all around the country and around the world to voice support for Israel in its battles with the Palestinians. In fact, all of the Israeli leaders were expected to attend, and it was expected to try to send a message to the United Nations, which has its opening session at that time, that Israel needed support. Also, there is another event the week after that. The United Monetary Fund is going to be meeting in Washington, and that was also expected to draw protesters from all around the world. In fact, so many protesters that Washington police officials had started building walls around various Washington monuments in an attempt to protect the monuments, Capitol buildings, and others from a possibility that there could be disruption. Now, I also want to tell you that President Bush is now saying he is launching a full-scale investigation to hunt down these terrorists. President Bush launching a full-scale investigation to hunt down these terrorists. I guess President Bush is no longer equivocating about whether or not the United States is under terrorist attack. Lisa, Michael, back to you.
Right, and we want to point out that the president is not and was not in Washington, D.C. this morning. He was in Sarasota, Florida, talking to school children when this happened, so he was completely safe. Governor Pataki, we understand, is in the city, and Mayor Giuliani is also here, of course, and he was preparing to speak earlier this morning, but of course that was prior to all of the secondary blasts. And
Marcia? Sorry to interrupt you, Lisa. Marcia, we understand you have another update.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do. CNN is now, believe it or not, reporting an explosion on Capitol Hill. Fortunately, the explosion happened after Capitol Police had started to evacuate the Capitol. We don't know if any of the senators or representatives were still in the building when the explosion happened, but there is another explosion. That makes 2 explosions and a fire in Washington. An explosion at the Pentagon that we've confirmed was caused by a plane. An explosion at the Capitol, we don't know what caused it, and a fire on the Washington Mall, we don't know what caused that. But the fact that there have been so many attacks would seem to indicate that there are people on the ground as well as in the air that are helping to set off and to participate in this terrorist event.
Are you able to hear me? If you could you please reiterate the information you had regarding the schools in the lower
mode where they were trying to get people back from the scene? And the seconds before the explosion happened, there was another renewed kind of interest in really getting people away. Because, of course, out of curiosity, everyone's trying to get close. Everyone's trying to get pictures of the World Trade Center on fire. They started screaming, "Get back, get back. There's another explosion happening." I guess they were being warned on their radios that the top was going to come down since it was burning for the better part of half an hour.
Hey, Nina,
as they screamed to get people back, they started screaming, "Leave Manhattan if possible. Everybody leave Manhattan as possible."
Nina, Jim Dolan here. You mentioned earlier that you spoke to somebody who had been evacuated from the 56th floor. Do you have an idea of how far along the evacuation had gotten at the point the second tower came down?
Jim, I was trying to ask her that because I couldn't believe that she was still in the building. But, of course, people were getting ready for their day. It was about, just before 9 o'clock. And she said that as soon as the smoke alarms and the fire alarms started sounding off in the building, there was panic. And they started retreating through the escapes, through the stairwells, and as they did, everybody was screaming, running. She said running over each other. There were other people collapsed. There was injured people. And then she said, horrifyingly, when she ran down about 6 flights, she's on the 50th floor, she started seeing other people come down being helped, advancing past them that were burned. Their bodies were burned. Their clothing was burned. They were unconscious. Their friends and colleagues were trying to help them down the steps. She said you couldn't even imagine what it was like for them to run down from the floors that weren't burned all the way down to the bottom. Some people collapsed when they got outside from exhaustion. Some people are having asthma attacks. And as she said, some people are very gravely and critically injured. They were also being laid out on the sidewalk there by the World Trade Center.
I'm going to move on here. I would like to ask you if you could try to find some people there who are okay, obviously, and who have escaped this, who can tell us some more eyewitness accounts. We'd much appreciate it, and we'll get back to you in a few minutes. Stay safe in the meantime. We do want to say that all federal buildings in the country have been shut down, and we're just getting a bulletin from the AP. The State Department, a senior government official says that some sort of possible explosion or fire has occurred at the State Department in Washington. That building has now been evacuated. They say it appears to be connected to the 2 plane crashes at the World Trade Center and the explosion at the Pentagon. John Del Giorno is providing us these pictures you're seeing. We have had problems getting audio from him because our communication is right there on top of that tower. John, can you hear me?
It is hard to describe exactly what we've witnessed here over Manhattan in the last hour and a half. We are still stationed over 79th Street looking south. There's been a 5-mile security perimeter set up around the World Trade Center by the police department. World Trade Center number 2, the North Tower here, continues to burn out of control. And initially, remembering that the first plane hit this building at 8:45 this morning, the second plane hit the south building just at 9 o'clock, and then that building subsequently collapsed shortly after 10 o'clock. We actually witnessed the second plane strike the South Tower. From our vantage point, we were actually southwest of the World Trade Center coming out of our base, and the plane actually flew over our heads and directly flush into the south face of the South Tower.
and exploded into flames immediately. That tower continued to burn for quite some time, and then again it subsequently collapsed down onto itself. Meanwhile, obviously the airspace in the area that is all shut down, Newark, Kennedy, and LaGuardia accepting no flights, and there are no departures as well. Teterboro airspace is closed. In essence, the entire airspace around New York City has been closed down. Currently, as far as a perimeter around the area, in the skies, obviously, today you would have to consider the skies a threat, and currently NYPD is operating their helicopters very close to the building, assisting state police agencies. I know New York State Police is down there, New Jersey State Police is down there as well, and interestingly enough, we, about 10 minutes ago, saw military fighter jets circling above Manhattan at about 2,500 feet, which is obviously something that you don't see here, and that is a security measure to prevent any further action from being taken. So that's the update from the sky right now. World Trade Center, the North Tower, continues to burn out of control, as it has since it was first struck by a plane at 8:45. The South World Trade Center tower has tragically collapsed. Really a momentous day in the history of the world as we witness this on the lower side of Manhattan.
Can you hear us? John, can you hear us?
Yes, I can just about make you out. If you speak slowly enough, I can answer all the questions you have.
Okay, there is a question that I have. We had gotten word that every aircraft that's out right now is being asked to find the nearest airport and to land. And I'm wondering if that in itself doesn't pose another threat.
Well, what they are trying to do right now, that order went out. We heard that order go out from Newark Airport's control tower a few minutes ago. That also has to do with a lot of commercial, with transient traffic, corporate traffic that comes in and out of the city, helicopters, corporate jets going into Teterboro Airport. They are being asked to find an airport outside of the area, find an airport other than Teterboro, Newark, LaGuardia, or Kennedy to go land at if New York City is their destination, because this airspace is immediately closed down.
John?
As a matter of fact, I can tell you the only reason that we're really being allowed to stay in here is because the controllers know us. They know the end number on the aircraft. They know who we are. But I would venture a guess to say that we also will be removed from the airspace entirely. And I would guess that that's going to happen momentarily. As we said, we saw F-16 fighter jets circling over Manhattan just within the last 15 minutes or so.
John,
how much? Obviously going to set up a very tight perimeter.
John, obviously, it's Bill Ritter. We want you to stay as long as you can and as long as it's safe. You've been up for a long time. I don't know how much gas you have left.
Well, that's another question, because as these events continue to happen, Captain Paul and myself are trying to figure out the best and the safest way to bring this story to you.
Well, you keep yourself safe, John. That's an order from Eyewitness News here. Let me just say, John, I have a question for you about that tower, but first we're getting word from the AP that the State Department official has confirmed that a car bomb exploded outside the State Department. There is obviously a coordinated effort and some sort of assault here on the United States in Washington and New York. We will give you a summary in a second, but John, looking at that North Tower, ABC News is reporting that the fire continues to burn, and it appears that the North Tower may be leaning. Can you tell? It's hard for us to tell through all that smoke.
It is hard to tell from this point, again, because I am exactly 5 miles away from it. But there's the shot of the North Tower, and if you line it up with the buildings down on the ground, Bill, I can't really give you an honest opinion on that. I will tell you that the fire, again, this plane crashed into about the 80th floor, and you'll see a gaping hole in the building. I'll brighten it up for you there. The fire appears to be spreading rather than subsiding. And again, obviously there's firefighting issues trying to get water up that high. But I really can't tell you whether or not the building is leaning or not.
Okay, John, keep us posted. Again, in order from our news director, you be safe out there and try to bring us all the pictures, but also watch your gas tank. Thank you.
All right, let's also go in our newsroom to David Ushery, who's been getting word on other closings in the area. Dave, you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Lori. We're getting some, as we see some video here coming in right now, obviously from the scene, developing a very chaotic situation. These from our crews down there, and they have been working diligently. We're getting word of some schools closing, or getting more definition of that, and for parents who may have concerns about that. 3 area high schools have been evacuated. They are Leadership and Public Service, the Economics and Science High School, and both of those are located at 100 Trinity Place, and Murray Bertram, 411 Pearl Street. All other students, we're told, are being kept in the schools under heightened security right now. Parents and only parents are allowed to pick the kids up. Parents and only parents, so we need to stress that. Parents and only parents being allowed to pick the children up. The following schools have been identified now for triage operations for the treatment of the injured. That's Stuyvesant High School, which is at Chambers and West Side Highway, and PS 234, as well as PS 89. We should also note that we are told that Mayor Giuliani will be having a news conference, although, of course, that's subject to change, but we're told he's going to have it. When he does, we will, of course, have that for you. One other note, police, heavily armed police now guarding the Port Authority offices and the control tower at Newark. Of course, the airports are closed. PATH commuter trains canceled. New Jersey Transit right now continuing to operate trains into New York's Penn Station, but we're told there's no bus service to the Port Authority. New Jersey State Police have their emergency command center up and running. Right now, city and federal buildings in Newark still open, though, again, heavily fortified. That's the latest now. We're going to continue to monitor these developments, particularly with the schools closing.
The other tower, as you can see, seems to be collapsing, David,
right,
as we watch.
Unbelievable.
This is, it's collapsing inward, and it's imploding. This is a horrific situation you're watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you are a child watching and you do not have a parent there, I don't know what to advise you. If you can understand this.
It's hard for an adult to understand.
Words cannot describe this. The North Tower of the World Trade Center, the second 110-foot structure that marks the landmark, that is a landmark of New York and Manhattan, and indeed the United States, has just collapsed.
And if you look at the timeline in which all of this has taken place in such a short period of time, 8:45 until now at 10:29.
Nina Pineda, can you hear us? Are you on the line at all, Nina? Nina is just a few blocks from there. And we do not have her amidst the chaos. We have not heard from Joe Torres. This is just so tragic that it's sort of
almost
ridiculous to say, to try to talk through this. It is so horrific.
Until today, the worst act of terrorism on American soil was the Until today, the worst act of terrorism on American soil was, of course, the bombing in Oklahoma City, an act of domestic terrorism, as it turned out. It pales, as horrible and as horrifying as it was, it pales in comparison to this.
Jim, these are live pictures, we're told.
You can see the smoke still on the ground, still filling the air there. This is obviously Lower Manhattan. We're trying to get an exact location. These are not live pictures because there was just an edit in them. So
on a Tuesday in September, after Labor Day, the second Tuesday, this is a teeming business district, and it has been turned into chaos. This is earlier. Can we go back to the live pictures if possible?
An hour and a half in which the world in the United States has changed dramatically. Sense of security has changed dramatically as at least 4 separate attacks on American soil against 4 symbols of American might.
You saw the picture of the Empire State Building standing in back of that smoke. John Del Giorno, can you hear me? John Del Giorno, he cannot hear me.
Yeah.
All of the radios are now down. We have lost radio contact with John Del Giorno. The World Trade Center, of course, provides the transmission towers for many of the broadcast, both radio and television.
Located on top
of those World Trade Centers. Those tops, of course, now on the bottom. As Jim said, the biggest act of terrorism, foreign terrorism, was against the World Trade Center on February 26, 1993. 6 people died, 1,000 people were injured in that attack.
And that also was designed, Bill, to bring down the World Trade Center.
It was. Well, someone has done it. A coordinated attack. The timeline, Jim Dolan has the timeline for us.
We'll start it at 8:45.
In the area, we do not know exactly what they'll be doing at this time. As we mentioned earlier, they are removing all aircraft within the region and enforcing a complete no-fly zone over Manhattan.
All right, Jim. Just got a word. I want to go ahead and reiterate that all off-duty firefighters have been ordered to report to duty. All off-duty firefighters have been ordered to report to duty, and you can understand why. I don't imagine there would be a firefighter out there who wouldn't want to come and assist the hundreds, thousands of people who are affected by this incredible national tragedy. You're looking live, ladies and gentlemen, at Chopper 2 at what is the aftermath of both World Trade Center towers having collapsed. Both towers have collapsed. 40,000 people worked at World Trade Center, not to mention the entire financial district down there. It was, and in the process of being evacuated, Hopefully, thousands of people were able to get out of that lower Manhattanville area. But you got to imagine, Michael, all the people who live there, all the people who work there, the children who go to school there, the children who are in daycare there, the support staff, doctors, of course, and the hospitals in the area are going to be inundated. This is something that you and I never, ever expected to see.
Sadly, we've had to bring you these pictures live as the situation across the country right now continues to develop. And we should tell you, if you're trying to get into the city, nothing is open, as would be obvious. However, I know there are parents out there who are concerned about their children. Again, word from the schools that the children in that area are okay. Of course, the schools are on lockdown. The children will not be released without their parents being there to pick them up. As you look live at the scene from Chopper 2 at what's left of the Manhattan skyline, just a smoky blur from New York Harbor. The two
just
largest
about every building covered in smoke.
Landmarks, both the World Trade Center towers collapsing. Not very long ago at all. The first instance that we had was the plane crash just before 9 into the first tower, a second crash into the second tower, 18 minutes later. Third blast brought down one tower, and then just moments ago, the second tower collapsed. Let's go back to Cindy Shoes in the newsroom for another update.
As you look at the second tower collapsing right there on the left side of your screen. Cindy, take it away.
All right, Michael and Lisa, I'm just watching. This is so hard to watch. New Jersey Transit has canceled all their transit that they're having right now. And talking about schools, Stuyvesant School is being used for triage. Again, Stuyvesant School used for triage. And we do have information on the first plane that went into the World Trade Center. It was the American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to LA. American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to LA, which is believed to have been hijacked. They are also evacuating City Hall right now. And New Jersey is under heightened state of alert. So that's all we have now from the newsroom.
Cindy, we should reiterate that the president was in Florida at the time of all of this, continues to be in Florida, reading to children, we're told. When his aides came in and told him just what happened, he did come into the country, though very briefly, just moments after 9 o'clock, after the second explosion, saying only that the government, and clearly it's an obvious remark at the time, didn't know how obvious it would be that the government is going to be investigating this, as I'm sure they have been from the moment this began to unfold, and that the full weight of the federal government would be behind the victims and their families.
Got to bring in also, Michael, this is primary day, and we're waiting on a report from the governor to make a decision about the primary day elections, whether they're going to be counted or whether we're going to postpone and reschedule primary day elections.
The governor, rather, happening to be in Manhattan, we understand today. We have not received word, other than we had been told that the president said that he had spoken with Governor Pataki as well as Mayor Giuliani, so we assume that they are okay, though we ourselves have not heard official word from the mayor and from the governor, though we do expect to hear shortly, if it's at all possible, that they can update the city as to what's happened.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, we're going to do a recap of this incredible, catastrophic event that has happened and is affecting not only Lower Manhattan, but all of the entire country and the world. We have had a plane crash into the tower of World Trade Center number 1. That plane has been identified as an American Airlines 757 flight number 11 from Boston on its way to LA that had been hijacked and went into and crashed into World Trade Center Tower number 1 shortly before 9 a.m. this morning. A second airplane unbelievably crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center shortly after, about 18 minutes after 9. And then President Bush made his comment. He called it an apparent terrorist attack. Shortly after that, ladies and gentlemen, we understood that an aircraft crashed into the Pentagon in Washington about an hour after the attacks in New York. And then shortly after 10 o'clock this morning, World Trade Center Tower number 1 collapsed, and then at 10:30, World Trade Center Tower number 2 collapsed.
And one of the stories we're also staying on top of for you is that we had received word that there was an unidentified aircraft that was now approaching an airport somewhere in northern Virginia. All we know is that the plane is unidentified. Now, as we told you earlier, the FAA has shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. All inbound international flights have been diverted to Canada. And as we continue to wait for word on this developing story, as we told you, that unidentified plane flying to one airport, we're not told which one, somewhere in northern Virginia, we can only reiterate the developments that have happened at this point.
Speaking of developments, Michael, I can't admit what happened in Washington, D.C. beside the explosion of the plane going into the Pentagon. We heard earlier that there was an explosion at Capitol Hill. We're relieved to say that it did not exist, that did not happen. There was no explosion at Capitol Hill, but we did hear reports earlier that there was a fire at the very popular Washington Mall in Washington, D.C. Cindy Hsu is in our newsroom. She's keeping up abreast of late-breaking details. Cindy.
Okay, Lisa, we're hearing, you know, I'm sure a lot of people are making calls down to friends, Lower Manhattan. The phones in the city are overloaded. Do not be surprised if you cannot get through. We're having a lot of trouble on the phone lines. We have an update on the schools. Now listen carefully. PS and IS 89 and PS 234, the students there are being walked to PS 41 at 116 West 11th Street. Let me say that again. PS and IS 89 and students from PS 234 are being walked to PS 41, which is located at 116 West 11th. We also have PS 150. The students from PS 150 are being walked to PS 3, and that's located at Christopher and Hudson. PS 150, the students there are being walked to PS.
As you can imagine, the news is flooding into us, and we're trying to get out to you best we can, bits and pieces. But again, I would just urge you, stay calm.
All right, John, let me interrupt you if I may, because yes, we have a further development. We're told now that from people in Washington that the Pentagon has undergone a partial collapse. As we've been telling you, the Pentagon was the third location struck by terrorists. And we understand that the Pentagon has collapsed at least partially. Mike Emanuel, are you there?
Yes, I am.
What can you tell us about this latest development?
It's just been a crazy day here in Washington. I mean, it's one of those days where you run in one direction, hearing news breaking in one area, and then it seems like something's happening in a different area. We can tell you that apparently a jet has crashed into the Pentagon. Personnel in that immediate area have been evacuated. There have been some reports that possibly another plane may be heading in that direction. Again, it's breaking news, so things have been, details have been kind of sketchy, but we can tell you the United States Capitol has been evacuated. The West Wing of the White House has been evacuated. There are reports of a possible car bombing outside the State Department here in Washington, D.C., so it's been a wild news day here in the nation's capital, as it has been in your city. And so emergency crews are scrambling everywhere. And we can tell you veterans of Washington, D.C. have said for the first time they can ever remember they've seen military planes flying over Washington, D.C., patrolling the skies after the Pentagon was hit. Eyewitnesses saying that they believe it was a U.S. Airways plane that came in low over the city, hitting a portion of the Pentagon. We have not gotten any numbers in terms of injured or possible fatalities, but we will get you those as soon as possible. But simply a crazy day here in Washington, as it has been in New York.
Mike, do you know anything about a report that we have here in New York that, according to the Capitol Police, a hijacked plane is en route to Washington now?
We've heard that report as well, and then we've also heard people saying that that is not so, that that's an erroneous report. We're trying to get to the bottom of it, but as you can understand with a situation like this, there's all kinds of information flowing around. It's kind of hard to confirm what is absolutely accurate and what is not. We can tell you we've heard that, and we're checking it out.
We also heard that the Pentagon building itself at least partially collapsed. Do you know anything about that?
We've heard that as well, that perhaps the southern portion of the Pentagon, part of that has come down. Have not got numbers in terms of who may have been injured or killed, but we can tell you it's an unbelievable scene here in Washington, something that none of us ever thought we would see, as I'm sure people in your city never imagined to see either.
We can say the same thing here, John. Mike, that's for sure. Again, first the World Trade Center, one tower was hit by a plane, then another tower hit by a plane. Then we got word that the Pentagon was hit in Washington, and then the World Trade Centers collapsed in Lower Manhattan. John Rowland's down in the newsroom. John?
Well, Jim, I don't have much for you. I just have some sketchy information here that another explosion, a fourth explosion out at the World Trade Center has gone off. One doesn't know if that's an ancillary thing because of what already happened or an additional explosion of some kind outside of that. There's also been a plane that has crashed in western Pennsylvania. A large plane crashes in western Pennsylvania. Officials at Somerset County Airport confirmed. That's right off the wire copy. Don't know if that's connected to what's going on. The Rodino Federal Building in Newark, that's been closed. All the workers there have been told to go home. Not necessarily because of a direct threat. They've just been told to go home to get out of there, obviously clearing out any federal, state, city, and local office buildings. Jim, that's the latest we have from here.
All right, John, I imagine, given the fact, I'm hearing word from the studio. Okay, I'm told all federal office buildings in Washington have
they're not letting, I'm coming in from Long Island. They're not letting anything but real extreme emergency vehicles over the 59th Street Bridge. Thousands of people are walking across to and fro. I was on the bridge when I believe the second tower may have crumbled, and people were just standing in shock. I mean, everybody's jaw just dropped, absolutely open.
Beat on that, but that we understand that that 767 out of Pittsburgh has been hijacked.
Let's refocus our attention, if we can, on the situation here in New York City. Lou Young joining us on the phone. Lou?
Well, we're just trying to get to City Hall a few moments ago. Walking down from Canal Street, everything, as you know, was completely blocked. Seas of people coming the other way, dumbfounded by the collapse of the first tower, and some of them covered with soot, many of them trying to just get out of town. City Hall, of course, was blocked off at that point because it was literally in the shadow or the potential fall zone of the second tower, which was at that point in danger of falling. We worked our way around to the south, trying to link up with some personnel, and we heard the warning that it was coming down. It seemed like it was just a panicked crowd running, and then the rumble began, and it was like an earthquake. The ground shaking. People took refuge in doorways. And then, following that, an immense cloud of dust choking off the very air people were trying to breathe. It was very, very difficult. People are just dumbstruck at what has happened here. The police are trying to evacuate all of Lower Manhattan, and they're trying to control the crowds, but there are far too few of them in many instances, and tempers are wearing thin. Some of them are exhausted. Some people have collapsed with exhaustion, and the scream of the sirens moving back and forth to the disaster scene is constant here. This is like nothing we've ever seen before.
You said it, Lou. Exactly where are you again?
We're at Duane and Greenwich. I'm using a shop phone here because all the cells are out, and our communication equipment that we normally use is simply not functioning because of what's happened.
We understand the entire city is in a state of gridlock. People are in a state of shock. Mouths are gaping open because this is a site that you never expected to see. The U.S. State Department has been evacuated. The United Nations has been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. Capitol has been evacuated. The Treasury Department. Also, we might have mentioned Sears Tower in Chicago
sure,
has been evacuated because of this, and of course, Los Angeles landmarks as well.
And then most recently, we're just having the reports now that large plane crashing in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Lou, stay with us as long as you can. Michael O'Looney joining us now on the set out here to give us a little further insight. Michael?
Well, Michael, maybe we can just talk about some of the local things. Again, all off-duty firemen are being asked to report to duty. The New York City public schools are in a lockdown. We've been talking about those two schools, PS 89 and PS 234. The students there are being walked to PS 41, which is at 116 West 11th Street. The parents can pick them up there if they can get there. The phones, as you probably know by now, are overloaded in the city as people are trying to get through to find out about their loved ones. 40 to 50,000 people work in those two towers, and 200,000 people pass through there on an average day. Just a catastrophe there. As we know, part of the Pentagon has collapsed after an apparent car bomb there. All the bridges and tunnels are closed into and out of the city. Primary day has been canceled by the Board of Elections, and the FAA has shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide.
Okay, that wraps that up.
Let's, if we can we bring Jim Smith back into the fold here? He's provided us live pictures this morning, and he told us earlier about the U.S. fighter jets over New Jersey. And Jim, to corroborate your story, we have confirmation that, in fact, that is the case, that fighters are over Bergen County right now.
Yeah, Michael, we have been in contact with those F-16 fighters. They have been flying over the area. I'm just going to talk with my pilot, Ed Baker, for 1 second. He has a little bit more on what's going on. Eddie, all right, we understand there are military aircraft in the area, and every aircraft in the area is being scrutinized. As we heard earlier, no planes are being allowed to take off. Nationwide, all planes that are in flight in this area, in this region, are being checked out thoroughly, and once those aircraft are removed from the area, they will not be allowed to take off at all. Virtual no-fly zone, no aircraft within any distance of Manhattan at this time.
That's completely understandable.
Jim, we know you're about 5-6 miles away from downtown Manhattan, but from your vantage point, what update, if any, can you give us on what you're seeing along the streets there?
Well, Michael, we can tell you that some of the smoke, dust, and debris is starting to clear out. Earlier, we were unable to see anything on the lower half of Manhattan. We are currently looking towards the Battery Park area. And we could see some buildings now becoming visible that we were unable to see earlier. We have noticed a lot of boats heading away from the lower Manhattan area, boats that were possibly down at the ferry terminal near Battery Park or also along the west side, the lower west side. Now we can tell you that the smoke itself is drifting out towards Brooklyn and Queens. We can see one line of smoke that extends clear out to pretty much Coney Island at this time. As we mentioned earlier, some of the buildings that were covered completely earlier now becoming somewhat visible towards the lower west side of Manhattan.
We should remind people that are trying to get information that the phone lines, as you'd imagine, have been overwhelmed. And Jim, still word that travel into and out of the city completely restricted.
Yeah, that's correct. All of the bridges and tunnels have been shut down. We have noticed that not only the Hudson River crossings, the Port Authority crossings, but many of the city crossings. The Verrazano Bridge is shut down. The Bayonne Bridge is shut down as well. And we can just urge people to stay away from the city at any cost. Do not try to go anywhere near Manhattan because of all this emergency response that is needed to get in there and do what they need to do.
Sure. Battery Park City, of course, highly, not only the financial district and employees working there, but there's a highly residential area too. A lot of apartment buildings in Battery Park City. That's primarily what it consists of, and you got to worry about those people as well. We're efforting videotape from the ground. These are going to be, when you get ready to see them, they're going to be fresh pictures, unedited pictures of course, people running, rescue crews trying to help. And we want to warn you that we have not been able to see them, and you'll be seeing them live as they happen. But again, you're looking at, okay, let's go ahead and roll that tape. Oh, this is tape of the initial explosion of World Trade Center 1 on your left side of your screen, and that's the collapse there earlier today, about 10 o'clock of World Trade Center 1.
Yeah, very difficult to keep track of time in these types of events. However, we can tell you, of course, that the first crash happening before 9, the second one 18 minutes later, and then, of course, a third explosion and collapse of one tower, followed by an explosion of another. Now, here is that unedited tape.
People covered in soot, in debris, screaming, in shock, no doubt. Firefighters covered in soot, debris that, of course, is traveling for miles.
The two towers, 110 stories tall each, and as Michael O'Looney reported a moment ago, 40 to 50,000 people working in those towers every day.
A national alert. All federal buildings in Washington, D.C. have been evacuated, and of course they're trying to evacuate all the buildings in lower Manhattan, no doubt. All firefighters, off-duty firefighters have been called, and you're looking at incredible debris, pieces of glass, of paper, parts of the buildings covering it looks like a desert almost. Looks like the aftermath of an earthquake. We heard from Lou Young a few moments ago who said that it felt like an earthquake. Now, Marcia Kramer is standing by at our information center, and Marcia, you've got more details for us.
Well, actually, Lisa, they're very grim details. We're hearing from intelligence sources that there were actually 8 planes that were hijacked and that 5 are still in the air. So that means that we've only heard from 3 planes, the 2 that hit the World Trade Center, the 1 that hit the Pentagon, and there are still 5 planes in the air. We don't know where they were hijacked from, and we don't know what their intended targets are. But right now, intelligence sources tell us that the Air Force is scrambling to try to identify the locations of the 5 other planes that have been hijacked and to see if they are intending to hit other targets in the United States. What we're also being told is that the likelihood of this attack is that it's a coordinated attack that was brought together by various Middle East groups that were acting together, possibly in concert with Osama bin Laden. So far, no group has claimed responsibility, but it's clear from the breadth of these attacks that it had been in the planning for quite some time, months, possibly a year, and it's probably in retaliation for U.S. support for the Israeli government. Again, there are 8 planes, American planes, that have been hijacked. 5 are still in the air. 3 have hit, 2 here in Manhattan at the World Trade Center, and 1 at the Pentagon in Washington.
Marcia, we had reported a moment ago that there was a large plane crash in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Would that just be a horrific coincidence?
Well, actually, we had reports about 20 minutes ago that there was a plane that had been hijacked in Pittsburgh and was headed for either Northern Virginia or Washington. That may have been the plane that crashed. If that's the case, then there's still 4 more planes in the air. But again, the report is that a total of 8 American planes have been hijacked. The Air Force and military intelligence are scrambling to try to take these planes out of the air before they can do any damage. It's possible, obviously this is speculation, but it's possible that the plane that crashed out of Pittsburgh may have been targeted by a military missile to try to take it down before it could crash into an American building.
Okay. John Slattery, we're worried about you. He was in Lower Manhattan right near the World Trade Center. We understand he escaped this and is now set up near the scene. John, can you hear me?
Plugged into this thing, I don't know.
All right, he's having difficulty
We'll
hearing
go back
us.
to John in just a couple of moments. Let's talk again with Michael O'Looney, who's joining us here on the set. Give us some further
Michael,
information.
the big news that Marcia just reported about 8 planes hijacked today, 5 still in the air, and their whereabouts unknown at this point. Fighter jets scrambling over New Jersey. There's a virtual no-fly zone throughout the country, especially in this area. No planes being allowed to take off nationwide. The AP reporting that a large plane crashed in western Pennsylvania. CNN reporting that a hijacked 767 is now circling an airport near Northern Virginia. And again, those 2 towers came down this morning, both hit by planes. Tower 1 hit around 9 o'clock, Tower 2 at 9:18. Both towers later collapsing. And again, as we've been saying, 40 to 50,000 people working in those 2 towers on an average day. 200,000 people passing through that complex each day. Apparent car bomb at the Pentagon. Part of the Pentagon has now collapsed. City Hall has been evacuated. All off-duty firefighters here in the city are being asked to report to work. New York City Public Schools are in a lockdown now, although PS 89 and PS 234, which are in that downtown area, the students there are being walked to PS 41. They've probably been walked out of there by now.
Sure.
The parents can pick them up. That school is located, again, PS 41 at 116 West 11th Street. All bridges and tunnels closed into and out of the city. And primary day, which had been such a big story this week, now fading. That's canceled by the Board of Elections.
Absolutely. And as Michael had mentioned, the FAA shutting down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. All inbound international flights have been diverted to Canada. Cindy Hsu in the newsroom with a further look at today's developments. Cindy?
Okay, Michael and Lisa, well, we're just hearing that Israel has evacuated all its diplomatic missions around the world. Again, Israel's evacuating all its diplomatic missions throughout the world. And then we're also getting state by state the way each state is reacting to these attacks. New York State specifically, security has clamped down across our state, and there were plans to increase security at border points. Governor George Pataki has canceled his New York City events. Let's go to New Jersey, where airports and river crossings to New York City are closed. Traffic is reported snarled on the Jersey Turnpike. Path commuter trains canceled. And Newark International Airport, there are officers with shotguns block the road, leading to Port Authority offices and the air traffic control. There is no service into New York City on the LIRR or Metro North. And again, we've told you that subway service is shut down here. Now, as far as I know, people trying to find out about their loved ones, we keep telling you that the phones in the city are overloaded, so we're having a lot of trouble getting through to people. But a lot of what's happening is people are being brought to New York, the downtown hospital, NYU downtown.
Set up by the fire department for firefighters to take off their bunker gear and to try to get the soot out of their noses, out the powder out of their noses, out of their mouths, and off of their heads and their eyes. There are people that still, there are cars around that are covered with this thick soot. And Carol Marin from 60 Minutes was one of those inside. I'm going to hand this over to you now, Carol.
John, I can't hear, so I don't know who I'm talking to. I just came out of and around Battery Park. After the second tower went down, I was trying to make my way to a CBS crew or to try to help CBS crews if I could. And then, I don't know what it was, John, but another explosion, a rolling blast of fire, a rolling column of fire towards us. If my respect for fire and police already knew no bounds, given the danger, it now exceeds what I thought it could, because a firefighter threw me into the wall of a building, covered me with his body as the flames approached us. And another police officer in New York named Brendan Duke, wherever he is, got me through smoke that neither one of us could see more than about a foot ahead of us. There are still people in there, excuse me, I've breathed them. Fair amount of soot. The personnel, the police and the fire working in there. are doing so against really dangerous odds, and they still don't know if there's something else left to explode, John.
Where were you at the time?
I was, not being a New Yorker, you'll have to help me here. I came around Stuyvesant High School, and that street is North End, and I came up and asked if anyone had seen a CBS crew. And I was directed by a firefighter who said, walk down the middle of the road because you don't know what's going to come down, at which point we heard a rumble like I've never heard before, and a firefighter ran towards me. We ran as fast as we could. I lost my shoes. I fell down. He picked me up and slammed me into a wall and covered me with him until we could make it more to safety.
Was this from the first rolling blast or the second?
John, I looked at my watch. It was about 10:44 is what my watch said. So it was after the second, I think the second tower explosion.
All right, Carol Marin from CBS 60 Minutes. I'm John Slatter.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the two towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America. It really is.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecured.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue.
That's unimaginable.
And again, to be trying to make it out yourself, hearing other people scream, seeing people about to jump, people literally walking out of their shoes and just walking around in a daze.
And once they get outside, it's not like you're safe. Ah, there it is. You're now walking into a nuclear winter, walking into a situation where we know some of our colleagues from other stations have lost their equipment because they were too close to the buildings as they came down. So first you get out of the buildings, and then the struggle really begins. So it was a day in hell for everyone who was in Lower Manhattan, particularly those who were in the Twin Towers.
We tend to put numbers and statistics to things like this and tragedies like this. You know, you have to figure there has to be hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in damage.
The world economy will probably not recover from this for years, if ever. Just to think of it this way, there are 150,000 people who work and visit the World Trade Center every day. They are there doing business. They're not going to be doing that business any longer. Morgan Stanley is one of the bulwarks of the international economy. Right now, whatever work was being done there doesn't get done any longer. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey was headquartered in that building. We don't really know if they have the capacity to operate, to say nothing of the banks and all that goes on there, the Federal Reserve. We're at a standstill internationally. We're going to start feeling the effects of that tomorrow and the day after.
Absolutely.
And my guess is that the President and Rowan may even address some of that tonight, although this evening people want to hear what we're going to do.
We have Donald Rumsfeld now, who is about to speak. Let's listen in.
No, you just heard me when you didn't need to, and you needed to hear Secretary Rumsfeld, and we are struggling to get that audio working, and in the meantime, we're just going to keep an eye on the Secretary until somebody tells me that we can actually hear him, and when we can, you will hear him as well. This has been quite a day for him. He spent the entire day inside the Pentagon, and much of it in the National Commands and national
throughout the
areas.
I should say we've received calls from across the world offering their sympathy and indeed their assistance in various ways. I'm very pleased to be joined here by Chairman Carl Levin and Senator John Warner. Senator Warner called earlier today and offered his support and was kind enough to come down and has been with us. We've very recently had a discussion with the President of the United States. Chairman Hugh Shelton has just landed from Europe. Secretary of the Army, Tom White, who has a responsibility for incidents like this as executive agent for the Department of Defense, is also joining me. It's an indication that the United States government is functioning in the face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. it'll be in business tomorrow. I know the interest in casualty figures, and all I can say is it's not possible to have solid casualty figures at this time, and the various components are doing roster checks, and we'll have information at some point in the future, and as quickly as it's possible to have it, it will certainly be made available to each of you. I'll be happy to take a few questions after asking First General Shelton if he would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people, acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Chairman. Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman preceding Carl Levin, I can assure you that the Congress stands behind our president, and the president speaks with one voice for this entire nation. This is indeed the most tragic hour in America's history, and yet I think it can be its finest hour, as our president and those with him, most notably our Secretary of Defense, our chairman, and the men and women of the armed forces all over this world stand ready not only to defend this nation and our allies against further attack, but to take such actions as are directed in the future in retaliation for this terrorist act. A series of terrorist acts unprecedented in world history. We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll adjourn. Charlie.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all, in any way, that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr.
Yes.
Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back? And if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. They, in no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
Mr. Secretary, you said you could not be specific about casualties. Can you give us some characterization of whether it's dozens or hundreds in the building?
Well, we know there were large number, many dozens in the aircraft that flew at full power, steering directly into between, I think, the first and second floor of the opposite the helipad. You've seen it. There cannot be any survivors. It just would be beyond comprehension. There are a number of people that they've not identified by name, but identified as being dead, and there are a number of casualties. But the FBI has secured the site, and the information takes time to come. People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us what you saw?
Mr. Secretary, do you consider what happened today, both in New York and here, an act of war?
There is no question but that the attack against the United States of America today was a vicious, well-coordinated, a massive attack against the United States of America. What words the lawyers will use to characterize it is for them.
Does that mean that the U.S. is at war then?
Mr. Secretary, you said that the Pentagon would be open for business tomorrow. What kind of assurances can you give the people who work here at the building that the building will be safe?
A terrorist can attack at any time, at any place, using any technique. It is physically impossible to defend at every time, in every place, against every technique. It is not possible to give guarantees. The people who work in this building do so voluntarily. They're brave people, and they do their jobs well.
Mr. Secretary, can you give a sense of what happened? What did you see when you left your office, ran down to the site, and apparently helped people on stretchers and then returned to the command center?
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building. Went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured. And a lot of volunteers were doing a terrific job helping to bring them out of the buildings and get them into stretchers and into ambulances and into airlifts.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us how many of the dead were soldiers and how many were civilians? Have you been able to determine?
Absolutely not. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, today we saw military planes both in New York and in Washington. How much more of a military presence will we see now that this incident has occurred for the next week?
Those kinds of decisions are made day to day. It is correct that we had aircraft flying protective missions at various places in the United States today, and they will do that as appropriate.
Mr. Secretary, what do you say to the American people who may have questions on how something so coordinated has been carried out against this nation? What do you say to them who might not have confidence that our intelligence and our security are what they should be?
I say to them that the President of the United States will be making some remarks to them this evening that will address those subjects.
Mr. Secretary, you declared, the Pentagon has declared ThreatCon Delta forces around the world. Could you tell me why? Have you received any threats, or has anyone claimed credit for this?
We have, in fact, declared Force Protection Condition Delta and a condition of high alert, indeed the highest alert. We did so almost immediately upon the attacks, and it is still in force.
Mr. Secretary, were there threats issued against other U.S. facilities elsewhere in the world today?
I don't know that there's a day that's gone by since I've been in this job that there haven't been threats somewhere in the world to some facility somewhere. It's one of the complexities of the intelligence business that you have to.
That, of course, is we believe that's the president's helicopter arriving on the South Lawn. Sometimes they will bring in more than one just in case, so nobody knows for sure which one the president is aboard. So we'll watch this with some care as we see the white-top helicopters of the very kind that become Marine One anytime they ferry the president from one location to another. This is the first one to land, and we'll see in a moment whether this is indeed the one the president is aboard or whether some staff member will emerge from it and the president will come on a subsequent one. But that picture is the south grounds of the White House. We saw moments ago, and you might have seen it when we flashed it on the screen, a picture of the dome of the Capitol as a couple of helicopters went by. There were indeed there was a little fleet of them, 4 or 5 helicopters that went by carrying staff, one presumes, military personnel, and no doubt some of the president's security people. The more the better at a time like that in the eyes of security people, because no one can tell for sure which one is actually carrying the president. But this is the first one to touch down there on the south lawn of the White House, so we will watch and see if the president emerges. It will be the first time since this morning that we have seen a live picture of the president of the United States, who has spent much of the rest of the day in the air aboard Air Force One, going from one U.S. military base to another, ultimately declining to go along with the recommendations of some of his security people that he go to the North American Air Defense Command inside of a mountain in Colorado and hover there until people gave the all clear. The president's advisors were not pleased with that request, felt it made the president look in an inappropriate light, and the result of that was the decision to come back here this evening, and that is what we are watching unfold as we speak here. It's not exactly clear that the president is going to speak at 9 p.m., but that was the estimate that was given us, so we will wait and see if the White House in fact confirms that. Joining us here in our studios in Washington is Republican Senator John Kyle of Arizona. Senator Kyle, you've now had a chance to be briefed yourself. You've heard the remarks from the Pentagon by a couple of your colleagues and, of course, by the Secretary of Defense. What are your impressions at this hour of this whole entire situation and the United States response to it to date?
Britt, I think those expressions were entirely appropriate. The concern for those who were injured and the concern for the families of those who were killed. The commitment that we would do everything we could to bring the perpetrators of this tragedy to justice and do what we could to ensure that it didn't happen in the future. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, though, I'm
going to interrupt you to note that there's the president.
I'm delighted that the president has returned to Washington. I think the American people want to hear from him. I hope we'll hear from him tonight. And I also hope that as a result of this tragedy, that the commitment that we all express verbally, we can translate into action, because there are many things we could do to improve our intelligence and our national security, and I'm afraid that, unfortunately, it may take an incident like this to actually force us to do some of those things that we could have done earlier.
There you see as the president goes by, see all those chairs and tables stacked up. There was to be on the south grounds of the White House tonight, Senator, as you know, a congressional picnic. And, of course, plans for that had to be scrubbed because of the obvious circumstances. There the president is walking up that fieldstone path there up to the west wing of the White House, from which he is expected to address the country in just a short period of time. There you see him joined by Karen Hughes, who did the talking for him a couple hours ago.
Representative who made his way out of the Washington Police Headquarters this afternoon, or early this morning, actually, and suggested that the estimates were that as many as 10,000 lives may have been lost in lower Manhattan. Our correspondent, Catherine Herridge, has been following developments throughout the day. She's with us from one of the hospitals besieged with patients this day. Catherine, how's it going there?
Actually, Shepard, within the last few minutes, I've had a very disturbing conversation with 2 of the residents from St. Vincent's Hospital who have been down at one of the triage centers, and they had only treated one person. They were told by rescue workers that because of the intense heat and smoke and debris that it was virtually impossible to go in and rescue anyone who still may be alive and buried beneath the rubble. Now, I just want to take you back in the last few minutes. New York's Governor George Pataki has also been down at the hospital for about the last 20 minutes, in fact. He's been talking, walking around, greeting people, trying to console them as much as he can, and also giving a briefing to reporters. Now, this is what we understand from hospital officials. They've taken 297 patients, approximately 45 in critical condition. Also among that total, 42 rescue workers, so firefighters and police officers. One emergency physician telling me earlier that initially they took waves and it was all primarily rescue workers. I was also told that at some points they were so covered with soot and debris that it was impossible to tell whether they were firefighters or police officers. For the most part, those rescue workers do not have very serious injuries, and we're grateful for that. They're suffering from abrasions to their eyes because of the concrete dust in the air. St. Vincent officials also confirming to us that they've had 3 deaths. When we asked them the cause, they said severe blunt injuries. Some, in fact, fell to their deaths. The under injuries also include multiple fractures and lacerations. Earlier this afternoon, we did have a briefing from New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani, as well as the New York Police Commissioner Bernard Carrick. They confirmed to us that the National Guard is on the scene, approximately 200 guardsmen. They're expecting about 1,500 later this evening. Of course, the city remains on a very heightened state of alert. There was one point, though, in the briefing where the New York mayor really praised the people of this city, saying that they had behaved with dignity and calm, and he really thinks that that presence of mind has helped to save lives. And I'm quoting here. The mayor said, "New York City is a lot stronger than this. We're going to overcome it, and we're going to be an example for everyone how to defeat terrorism, and that it's important for people not to be afraid." Just a couple of anecdotes I want to share with you. When I was down near the World Trade Center, one of the firefighters stopped just briefly and spoke to me, and he said essentially that it was just bedlam. It was like a second Pearl Harbor. Those were his words. And I also asked him what he was concerned about most, and he said, "You know, there are 8 men in my company that are unaccounted for, and I can't go back in for them now. They're just unaccounted for." I've also been talking to family members out here on the street. Spoke to one man. He was a member of one of the carpenters' unions, and he told me that there were dozens of people from his union who were working in the World Trade Center today. He thought perhaps as many as 200 or 300 working on the upper floors, and they've had no word of them. And this is why he came to St. Vincent's, to see if any of them had survived this disaster, Shepard.
Catherine Herridge, live with us from the hospital. We will keep watch there. The numbers at an initial look might sound good, that there are just a few hundred people who have been taken to area hospitals, a few hundred people that have been reported to us. There are different ways to read that, of course. The video at which you were just looking was the collapse of the 3rd building there. They call it Building 7 at World Financial Center, a 42-story structure, certainly a building that would have towered above most skylines across America. It was dwarfed, of course, in the shadow of the World Trade Center, but it collapsed just about an hour and a half or so ago, I believe. That was expected. There had been a lot of shaking on Lower Manhattan. They knew that it would come down. The question was when, and now it has. As many as 50,000 people working in that building. Thousands of tourists on a given day would visit as well, and putting numbers together is something that simply cannot yet be done. Seeing those pictures, knowing that, imagine, if you will, the number of people in the city of New York who knew people who went down with TWA Flight 800. Everyone seemed to know someone. Rest assured, everyone does know someone who was inside the World Trade Center this morning. Of course, there was also a horrible explosion a short time after at the Pentagon in Washington. We now know that it was a Boeing 757. The story of how this evolved is now coming out in bits and pieces of reporting, in a fascinating article by Don Phillips in the Washington Post, which is out late this afternoon, describing controllers watching their radar screen and seeing this very strange object, a large plane, flying at an unusually high speed without the beeper going, meaning the instrument which tells the tower what kind of plane that is, that it is in fact Flight 77 from American Airlines, that was turned off. And according to the reporting by Don Phillips of the Washington Post, this 757 turned tightly and circled. But before so, it was flying at an unusually high speed directly toward the White House. Direct coordinates for the White House. The tower calls authorities minutes before the 757, turned tightly and circled around to slam directly into the Pentagon. The controllers couldn't identify this plane, as I mentioned, and they are now saying the skill with which the plane was flown, including this knowledge of how to turn off the transponder, raised the probability that a trained pilot was at the controls, possibly a hijacker. Sources close to Don Phillips, the staff writer, were not specific about the times of the event, but said that after leaving Dulles, the plane continued west for a while. At some point, apparently, after turning off the transponder, the plane turned back toward Washington with no radar contact, no radio contact, headed directly for 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It would have appeared on radar screens as an unidentified blip called a primary target, something commonly seen by controllers when an aircraft does not have a transponder or is a military aircraft flying with its transponder turned off. But the airspace around Dulles, Washington Reagan National, and much of Washington is designated Class B, which means no one's supposed to fly in there without a working transponder. They knew something was up, but they didn't know what. And eventually they watched the plane began turning to the right, away from the Pentagon, from the southwest. Then it dropped below radar level, disappearing from the controller's screen shortly before hitting the Pentagon just about 9:30 a.m. Washington time this morning, less than an hour after the two aircraft hit the World Trade Center, flying below 10,000 feet at an extremely high rate of speed. Now it's believed at least, that a trained pilot was at the helm when Barbara Olson and many others on board were crashed into what was largely an unoccupied portion of the Pentagon, a fire which burned throughout much of the day. The fires are still burning in lower Manhattan. The rescue effort is underway. The 44,000 police officers of this city have not had a moment off since all of this began. You are looking live from our Midtown headquarters now as the smoke continues to rise, and certainly now the emotions go all over the spectrum. In the hours after the Oklahoma City bombing, grief and tears and wonderment, how could such a tragic thing happen?
Craft as it was headed towards New York City.
Plane took off about 8 o'clock out of Logan in Boston on its way to Los Angeles, climbed to 29,000 feet and cruising at about 450 knots. About that time, 8:28, the flight took an immediate hard left turn due south. The speed initially decreased by over 100 miles an hour and then increased to over 500. And then as it approached the New York area, it slowed to all the way down to about 300 knots. So, and then tragically it impacted in the World Trade Center. American 11 was indeed the first flight. We have confirmed that, of the two.
But as ABC's Charlie Gibson points out in this conversation with me just a moment, Charlie, there were two rogue aircraft who were out of flight pattern.
Well, Peter, the two airplanes that hit the two twin towers of the World Trade Center were both out of Boston. That was a description of what happened to Flight 11, which was the first one to come into the towers. And just looking at the timing, it's interesting. The plane took off at exactly 8 o'clock from Logan Airport in Boston, and it was at 8:28 that it took that hard left-hand turn and then crashed into the World Trade Center at about 8:45. So that means for 17 minutes, some air traffic controller had to know that they had a rogue aircraft on their hands heading for New York City. The other flight, the one that went into the second World Trade Center, and that was United Flight 175, a 767 that had taken off for Boston for Los Angeles, took off at 8:15. Then just after it passed the Massachusetts-Connecticut border heading west, just south of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the flight took a 30-degree turn to the south, left toward New Jersey, then another 90-degree turn. It was heading toward Atlantic City, and then it took another hard turn northeast, basically doing a U-turn over New Jersey, and slammed into the to the building at 9:03. So again, for a considerable period of time, the air traffic controllers had to know that they had not one but two rogue aircrafts heading for New York.
Thanks, Charlie, very much. Now we want to go to Washington. I think it's Washington because the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, is about to make a public appearance in the White House press room with the man, of course, responsible for the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy?
On Ashcroft. And this is Tommy Thompson,
Every
the
single
Secretary of Health
American
and Human Services.
lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area
to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City, and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
Well, it is important for the country. This is, let's just come away from the White House for just a moment, for a second now, and just inadvertently, we get from, it's so important at this point to hear from the representatives of government. Here are the leaders of the Senate and the House of Representatives together. The Speaker of the House in the middle, Dennis Hastert, Tom Daschle, the Senate leader, to his left.
At a time like this, no words that we should utter today or this evening can help the hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today.
Office building that I go to every day is gone.
Matt, before you got any further, we were just looking at shots of the countless number of New York firefighters that were on the scene. We are just getting information from a union official of some of the 400 firefighters that initially went into that area. 200 may have perished. Matt, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight on this incredibly tragic day of our American history. Let's go back to Wolf Blitzer. Once again, Wolf, New York City officials are not confirming, nor is the Pentagon, exactly how many people were injured here or how many people died. I know Governor Pataki of New York was saying earlier this evening it will be many, many days before we have any of those numbers.
Those numbers are being collected, but I'm sure it's way too early, as you point out, Paula, to have even a rough guess how high that number will eventually go. Just to recap once again, President Bush preparing to address the nation in less than an hour or so, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, an Oval Office address for President Bush from the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent John King is back on the North Lawn of the White House. John, you're back in the briefing room now. John, you were listening to that briefing when we went to the...
Money is going to be a big part of it. Many of the airlines are in financial trouble to begin with. It is not a very healthy industry of late. We see that with the mergers and proposed mergers, etc. How much has to be added to the price of a ticket yet remains to be seen, but we do know that there's more demand of those seats than there are seats. And there are people, especially business people, who pay any price to be able to fly and have the convenience, but certainly not willing to pay the price of compromising their safety.
Congressman, former President Clinton is apparently in Australia, and he was reached in a telephone interview. He said we should not be second-guessing. We should be supporting President Bush. He says the most important thing is we all have to be strong, calm, good Americans now, rally behind the president. Clinton was president only a few weeks when the terrorists blew up the truck bomb in the basement of the World Trade Center. That was back in February of '93. That killed 6, injured more than 1,000. And he also dealt with the April 1995 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, where 168 people died. But the Twin Towers go down, 50,000 people in them, so that is an entirely different situation.
I think we're all gratified at the very supportive statements that President Clinton made, and I think that most of us expected that of him, and I'm sure we'll hear the same basically from President Carter and President Ford as well, and I think that most Americans appreciate those kinds of sentiments.
Former Vice President Al Gore, it is an unspeakable tragedy. My heart goes out to the victims and their families. He was in Vienna, Austria. He was about to make a speech to a high-tech group there, but he canceled the talk.
Scott, we're going back to Manhattan now for a live report from Chris King. Chris?
Colleen, I'm standing here in front of St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. Of course, there are still enormous numbers of people, emergency crews, doctors, nurses waiting outside, of course, for the worst to happen. And so far, the worst has not happened. And if you can believe that, about 319 patients have been brought in so far. 55 of them are in critical condition. About 3 deaths have been reported so far. Now, New York Governor Pataki came by here not too long ago. He went in to survey the damage, see what was happening inside, and he came out and spoke with reporters. He says this is, quote, an enormous tragedy. He said the National Guard have been called in, and he said he saw people lined up to donate blood. I'm sorry, there's been a bit of a noise over here to the side, but apparently it's nothing to worry about, actually. Efforts to help people are ongoing. The circumstances are difficult, but Governor Pataki says the state will do everything it can to rebuild New York City, to rebuild after this terrible tragedy. A hospital spokesman also came out a little while ago. He, of course, said that there are 319 people who were brought in. Hundreds of people have been coming in throughout the day. Most of the critical injuries came in a bit earlier. Dr. Lenny Bekalchuk said that the critical patients, of course, came in early in the day. So they had severe burns, they had cardiac arrest, smoke inhalations, and hot air burns to the lung. This is an incredible situation. It's ongoing, and of course, as soon as we have more details, we'll keep you updated. Back to you in the newsroom.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Very much. Congressman Ackerman, final thoughts from you?
I think that all of us as Americans have to band together. We have to be thoughtful during this entire process. We have to be supportive of the families who have lost loved ones. We have to pray that the damage is not as bad as some of us surmise that it most likely is. As a nation, we're going to have to respond in a forceful but thoughtful manner, and we have to make sure that those to whom we respond are the appropriate people, and that we don't overreact and overreach to some of our own citizens to make them scapegoats of the actions of others for whom they have no culpability.
And you will be going to Washington?
I will be on the floor in Washington when they wrap the gavel with the rest of our colleagues.
Okay.
Thanks
so much
for coming by to talk with us.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this great public service. And try to get some sleep tonight at whatever hour it's going to be.
Who knows?
Many people. It'll be a sleepless night for a lot of people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Congressman. Just to update you before we go to Sarah Roche, we've gotten word that President Bush will be addressing the nation at 8:30 Eastern Time. The original broadcast was going to be at 9 o'clock from the White House, but there's a bulletin from the Associated Press saying that Mr. Bush will speak to the nation tonight at 8:30. It's now 7:41. We want to go to Sarah right now? We have Anthony. Anthony, what's your last name?
Ricky.
Ricky, and you survived not only the blast in 93, or both blasts this time.
Yes.
After two separate plane crashes ripped gaping holes through several stories of the New York landmark.
We was looking out the window because we saw the paper going around, and we was looking out. All of a sudden, we seen a plane come from this direction. You on the same floor? Yeah, remember I told you. Yeah, I told you. Went right through this building right over here.
2 blocks away.
All right.
Have this
The second plane came from that side.
Have this
right
interview
into
2
the
blocks
side.
away. Come on, let's go.
I saw it all.
Were you in the building?
I was in the 50th floor of the Millennium Hilton, and I was getting ready to call my wife. I heard the whine of a jet. An American Airlines jet hit the tower.
Smoke plummeted in every direction. As I ran for cover in our live truck, hundreds of people stranded downtown followed me through the streets, chased by a noxious, thick black smoke that made it virtually impossible to see. As I reached our truck, I watched everyone around me scrambling for cover, uncertain after the second blast what could happen next. And then, just as the smoke cleared amidst debris and black soot falling from the sky, what sounded like a sonic boom as the first and then the second tower tumbled. It was close to 20 minutes later before we could see anything. Our truck both blanketed and filled with a blinding, dense black powder. Eventually, we were able to make our way out of the Wall Street area, stopping along the way to answer questions and offer whatever assistance we could to startled and shocked workers trying to find a way out. Store owners and residents along the FDR Drive stopping to pass out water and wet towels to wipe away the gritty reminder of what we had all witnessed.
What I think, I'm used to that. I came from Israel, and it happens all the time. But I came here to run away from all of that, and when you see it here, I don't have what to say.
It's sad, a whole lot of innocent people.
And though the ambulances at St. Vincent's Hospital were arriving at a slower pace than staff would have liked, they are equipped to handle this tragedy, treating mostly firemen and office workers with smoke inhalation injuries. They say, though, it's the emotional scars that they'll be left to heal when this day is done. The hospital, a level 1 trauma center, worked feverishly to save civilians and rescue workers brought in with burns, heart failure, and intensive smoke inhalation injuries. And how is everyone holding up inside?
This is a fantastic effort on the part of this hospital to come together at this great tragedy and do a great job. There's lots and lots of people who are dealing with this very, very well in this hospital.
And what types of injuries have they seen?
Right now there's inhalation injuries. There's been some trauma from basically being caught in the building. Mostly those two types of injuries, traumatic injuries, and also injuries from burns and inhalation.
And officials here are reaching out to fire and police workers as well, including an emotional officer, Tyrone Dux of the 6th Precinct, who himself spent much of today delivering medical supplies to Wall Street rescue crews on his motorbike.
There's a lot of families that lost people, cops, firemen, not even just us, it's just innocent civilians that were lost today. And I hope our country takes action for this. I hope we find out who did this, and we take swift action. This is something I couldn't imagine in 18 years being a police officer, what I've seen.
As others gather to see if they could help, everyone is being asked to donate blood, and a 3-hour wait to do so at St. Vincent's has not stopped hundreds of Good Samaritans from rolling up their sleeves. From St. Vincent's Hospital in Manhattan, I'm Jamie Colby for the WB11 News.
And Jamie told us earlier that her husband is one of the doctors there at St. Vincent's, and when they saw each other, they were so relieved because he really had no idea how she was, and she didn't know about him either.
Suburb of Washington, that's in Maryland. So that would be
it's
where
up
this
in the
happened.
mountains, actually.
In the mountains of Maryland, and this crash would have been north of that.
Yeah. Which would have put it in Pennsylvania, right?
That's right, exactly.
So how do they even begin to investigate? We saw many of the FBI agents, of course, already on the scene today.
Well, like I said at the top, this is such a mass effort. It's NTSB, it is everyone from the FAA, the airlines, the aeronautical division, but also you have U.S. intelligence involved because of the fact that it's a terrorist attack. So all these agencies will coordinate, and it's a massive undertaking, certainly.
Yeah, sometimes we have to be the bearer of certainly bad news, bad statistics, and these numbers I'm about to give you are also part of that. What we are told at the moment that there are 250 firefighters missing. There are 200 police officers missing. That's a total of 450 souls that are missing at the moment. Hopefully, some of those will be found, that they've gone elsewhere, they've done other things to help, but that's what the authorities in New York are telling us at the moment.
Also to talk about embassy closings for just a moment. Several U.S. embassies in the Middle East are closed indefinitely. The State Department is urging embassies worldwide to take necessary security precautions and has given them the option to close. Embassies in Yemen, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates announced that as of tomorrow they are closing indefinitely. The embassy in Saudi Arabia will remain open. Americans in Egypt are being urged to keep travel to a minimum and avoid public places and large gatherings. The U.S. Embassy in Venezuela has erected concrete security barriers and opted to shut down at least through tomorrow. And of course, the American Embassy in Japan will not be open tomorrow.
What a day. What a day. Earlier today, Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura reacted to the events in New York City. He assured the citizens of his state that a security plan is in place.
This is a time of great shock, of great sorrow and great concern. But this is a time that we must be confident that we can meet the very difficult challenges put forth by these senseless and tragic acts.
Governor Ventura went on to say that he is in constant contact with the FBI and that all public buildings in his area are secure.
It has really been interesting, too, to listen to some of the quotes from many people that we've heard tonight. Norm Mineta, Transportation Department head, talked about how, and of course, even before him, I remember Attorney General John Ashcroft saying, justice will be done. The Transportation Secretary saying, we were caught by surprise today, but we will not. Transportation will continue. And of course, every single American lost something today. Now we begin to heal.
And that healing will start this evening, about 45 minutes from now, when the President of the United States, George W. Bush, will in fact address the nation to talk about this tragedy, both in New York and in Washington today at the Pentagon, and to what America's response might be. He may perhaps give hints of that, but I think the most important thing that he probably will do tonight is to talk about unity and coming together, no partisanship. Let's get through this. Let's help the injured. Let's identify the dead. Let's get on with it and conduct an appropriate memorial and service and then figure out what we have to do.
One of the things we want to do right now is bring Reg Wells back in. He's been updating us all day on the all-important emergency numbers. Reg?
Well, if you're expecting people home from work, Route 3 westbound has been closed for the last 3 hours.
Crashed into a wooded area outside of Pittsburgh.
This is the greatest country in the face of the earth, and I think it is. But we got to understand, we are the most hated, despised nation probably in existence in all of history.
Terrorism experts and world leaders are reacting to this unsurpassed tragedy in the United States.
Today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people. Acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country.
That was Joint Chiefs of Staff General Henry H. Shelton. Of course, the scope of these well-planned attacks unfathomable now. It's believed there are thousands of casualties. Brenda?
Thank you very much, Joanne. Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton is now being interviewed by CNN. Let's listen in.
He deems necessary to take, both in the retaliation that will be called for, and also in the very important work of rebuilding New York and the Pentagon. We can't let these evil acts in any way deter us from, making it clear that the United States is resolute, and we are going to support the president.
And are you getting any new information from law enforcement out of New York about just the extent of the loss in New York?
John, I don't think we even have an inkling of the devastation. We've not really had the kind of coverage at ground zero that would show what I'm hearing. Rubble sometimes up to your waist. Our firemen and police officers wading through dangerous circumstances, trying to see if there are any survivors. The numbers of people who are injured and who we fear are casualties, I think will be terrible once they are fully understood. I'm very proud of New York City. The mayor, the police, the fire, all the people working in the emergency front lines have done a superb job. But, you know, New York is the global city. It's the symbol of American leadership, and, you know, these terrorists made a direct hit on who we are as a people, and New York has responded, and the national government has to stand behind us.
And Senator, you had told us earlier that you had spoken at length with former president, your husband. What is Mr. Clinton saying?
Well, he's outraged and, you know, deeply angry, as I think all of us are, but is absolutely behind whatever this administration chooses to do, because he knows how important it is to speak with one voice on behalf of our country. This is something that he and I believe strongly, having been on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. You know, and let me say, too, that our country not only has to retaliate directly against those who perpetrated this attack, but we have to make it very clear that we cannot permit any state, any government, any institution or individual to pursue terrorist aims.
Listening again to Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton reacting to today's events. And now we're going to go on to Liberty State Park in New Jersey, or in Jersey City rather, has seen its share of the injured today. Many were taken across the Hudson by boat. From there, they went to hospitals all across New Jersey, some as far away as Toms River. Jersey City alone has so far ended up with about 600 of the injured. Mayor Glenn Cunningham says his community is pulled together at this tragic time.
And the collapse of the buildings was a tremendous spirit of people. There were many people, I assume many were volunteers who were down there giving out water. There were hundreds and hundreds of bottles of water being given to the people as they came off the boat. People ordering friendship and comradeship and comfort. It was a horrible experience, but to see the spirit of the people was still there.
So far, all of those...
In the World Trade Center attack, the buildings came down, of course. Many of those firemen were at the base of those buildings involved in firefighting and rescue efforts at the time. That's the first number that we've had from a reliable source that comes from the firefighters union tonight. Earlier, Mayor Giuliani would only say that he expected the death toll to be horrendous. At one point, they had 1,500 people being treated at Liberty Park, which is at the tip of Manhattan. This will be going on throughout the evening in New York. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now and see what the very latest is on the hijacking of these 4 planes today, 2 from Boston, 1 from Newark, and 1 from Washington Dulles. Robert?
Tom, there are little glimmers coming out of what may have gone on in the cockpits of some of these planes. The Attorney General John Ashcroft in his news conference this evening mentioned knives when he was talking about the first of these planes to be hijacked, the American airliner out of Boston Logan that was the first to go into World Trade Center number 1. There were several cell phone calls from planes. You mentioned Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Theodore Olson. She called her husband twice before the plane that she was on, which was one that left Dulles and was bound for Los Angeles, before that plane crashed into the Pentagon. And she mentioned people in the back of the plane with knife-like devices. There was another person who called a relative from a plane and said that the passengers and the pilots of that plane had been herded into the back and that the terrorists were at the controls of the aircraft. We haven't heard guns mentioned yet, but presumably those were weapons too taken aboard, but no one has confirmed that at all at this point. Other cell phone calls monitored from people. There was one unconfirmed report of a flight attendant on that first flight, the Boston flight, who called and said that the crew had been killed and that she'd been locked in the restroom, and then they didn't hear any more from her. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager tonight. Robert, let me just catch up with you quickly. Tomorrow, we do expect that air travel will resume at noon Eastern time. But what should travelers expect in terms of security at airports?
Oh, it will be very, very strong, and I'm not sure they'll actually do it at noon Eastern time is what we've heard, but we simply said that there was not going to be, this is the FAA said, any more travel until noon tomorrow, and then they would reassess at that point. So we don't know for sure that they'll resume at noon.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Robert Hager. This day is the 11th of September, the year 2001. Some people have said
the 9th month, the 11th day, 9/11, is a day that will be in bold print in future history books, a day that is a dark mark for this country, a day that everyone will remember where they were when they heard the news. After all, our largest city and most vital financial market immobilized, the country terrorized politically and psychologically. Dateline's Stone Phillips tonight takes us through this astonishing day, minute by minute.
Today, the unimaginable happened. At the start of a busy workday, New Yorkers heard an explosion, then looked up to see a symbol of America's economic power, one of the World Trade Center's twin towers billowing smoke and flames.
Yeah, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
Minutes later, literally from out of the blue, an even more horrifying sight. A jetliner bearing down on the other tower. It was a direct hit.
A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
Before the hour was out, the symbol of American military power, the Pentagon, was also in flames. It too apparently the target of a new weapon, a passenger jet hijacked and turned into a guided missile. Across the country, shock, sorrow, fear, outrage, and the realization that America was under attack. About 8:45 this morning, the sky over Manhattan was clear following a night of violent thunderstorms. In the city's financial district, the very heart of American commerce, thousands of workers were already at their desks. Moments later, in the upper reaches of the 110-story North Tower, sudden impact.
As Matt just mentioned, we have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City.
1 second after the sound started, there was gray smoke and what looked to be like confetti flying all over the place.
Fire and death above, confusion below, as some 10,000 people streamed out of the building.
It was a lady had a big gash on her head, so it was people stampeding one over top of another.
Witnesses reported a horrifying scene. Desperate people jumping from the burning skyscraper. Bloody clothing and body parts scattered on the streets below. As emergency crews rushed to the southern tip of Manhattan, the immediate thought, could it really be happening again? In 1993, the same building was hit by a truck bomb, Islamic militants hoping to topple the one tower into the other. 6 people died in that attack, and 1,500 were injured. But within the first minutes today, it was clear that the toll this time would be much higher. Then, at 9:03, less than 20 minutes after the first strike, with police and rescue personnel still scrambling to respond, this.
There were many people in the building.
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
Live cameras trained on the first stricken tower captured another huge explosion, this one on the South Tower. Only this time, the attack was documented. This indelible image to be replayed again and again, seared into the American memory.
And here it comes right there.
An American Airlines 767 with 92 people on board hijacked on its flight from Boston to Los Angeles, becoming the implement of mass murder. The impact was devastating, the airliner punching through the skin of the huge tower, another rain of glass, concrete, and terror.
It's like this unbelievable ball of fire, and the whole street, which is now awakened, everyone's like, whoa. People start crying, people start running.
It was now clear that this was no accident. The first tower had also been hit by a hijacked passenger jet, a United flight that had also taken off from Boston, bound for L.A. The attacks left New York virtually paralyzed. Tunnels and bridges linking the city shut down, subways closed, telephone lines jammed, cell phones overloaded as frantic callers tried to contact loved ones. At 9:30, President Bush, in Florida to talk about education, addressed a nation reeling and in need of reassurance.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center, in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
But even as the president pledged to hunt down and punish those responsible, another attack, this one even more audacious. The target, the Pentagon. Another American Airlines jet bound for Los Angeles had been hijacked, this one taking off from Washington's Dulles Airport. It was another direct hit. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklashevsky suddenly found himself on the front lines of a war that had come home.
I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
9:43 a.m. With concern that the White House could be a target, President Bush boarded Air Force One bound for a special secure command post at a military base. At 9:49, the Federal Aviation Administration announced it was shutting down the nation's air traffic. In a world turned upside down, hundreds of passenger planes crisscrossing the country were now potential terrorist weapons.
The Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport.
This morning, on a scale beyond belief, Americans experienced what it's like to feel truly vulnerable, to realize when someone is willing to die for a cause, we are all potential targets. The number one suspect, this man, Osama bin Laden, a radical Islamic terrorist linked to past attacks on American interests. A London-based Arab journalist said today that 3 weeks ago, followers of bin Laden warned of a huge and unprecedented attack on the U.S. Was this it?
Somebody provided the logistical support for this operation, and clearly the only person, or one of the only people, that has built up such a network in the world today is Osama bin Laden.
There was no word from bin Laden, but the Taliban-ruled government of Afghanistan, where bin Laden is based, issued a statement this morning condemning the attacks and saying bin Laden did not have the capability to carry out such acts. And there were plenty of other suspects, ranging from radical Palestinian groups to rogue governments.
President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks.
While the nation's intelligence community ran down possible suspects and tried to assess whether more attacks were imminent, rescue workers in New York and Washington confronted a disaster of immense proportions. In New York, local hospitals began filling up, urgent calls going out to every available surgeon and nurse, long lines of people outside waiting to donate blood.
There's a war zone. Unbelievable.
And still, there was worse to come. At 9:59 a.m., the Trade Center's South Tower, the building that took the second hit, began to crumble. It was almost incomprehensible. In a matter of seconds, the skyscraper collapsed and was gone.
Suddenly, we hear, the security say, everyone get out now, everyone run for your life.
NBC producer Shahar Baran was there with a home video camera.
A bunch of women just standing there, shocked. By then, the whole building sort of implodes. It just goes like this. And you see like a side of the building, and then it goes, and there's this ball, this silver yellow ball sort of heading towards you, kind of in slow motion. You can't figure out what to do. People are starting to run like crazy.
If you take a look behind
Then, at 10 a.m., news of another passenger plane in trouble. Someone on United Airlines Flight 93, traveling from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, called 911 and reported a hijacking. Then, an explosion and silence. The plane crashed here, some 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. There were 45 people on board. So far, 3 passenger jets used kamikaze style, and a 4th that might have been. 266 people on board killed. The death toll on the ground still unclear. Then, at 10:30, another sickening sight. The tower still standing, following its twin, collapsing, vanishing in a cloud of smoke. By 11 o'clock, the sense of alarm had spread across the country. Troops standing guard as national landmarks were shut down. Fighter jets actually patrolling the skies as the last airborne passenger planes rushed to safety. 11:14, officials trying to manage the disaster, struggling to describe it all.
First of all, Chief, do we have any idea of how many people are in there?
We have no idea. Now, as you know, it was pretty much rush hour time that this took place this morning, so the numbers we don't know yet. We tried to get almost everybody out that we could early on.
10,000 people in each tower would typically be in there on a normal business day, and we get about another 5,000 visitors during the course of the entire day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building should have been full.
And New Yorkers were struggling too.
And now they both collapsed. There's no more World Trade Centers.
At 11:42, another plane from Boston declared an emergency. Fearing a bomb on board, it landed in Cleveland. Soon, all planes in Canada as well as the U.S. were grounded. The borders with Mexico and Canada were sealed, and Major League Baseball announced the cancellation of all games scheduled for today. At 1:12, President Bush, at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, again spoke to the nation.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Moments after his speech, the president reboarded Air Force One for a then undisclosed location. Meanwhile, in New York, an army of rescue workers and volunteers from the city's building trades and other unions made their way to the wreckage of Lower Manhattan, seeking the injured and dead.
You guys going back?
Yes. It's our job.
You worried about that other tower?
Personally, I am. I got fellow officers that might be trapped. I'm not trying to be a hero, but I think if you were in this position, you'd do the same thing.
Those civilians who could made their way by foot across the Brooklyn Bridge, as New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani called for calm in a city that was more shell-shocked than terrified.
And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal.
The mayor's news conference gave the first hint of just how high the casualty count could be.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon.
Just before 3 p.m., President Bush landed at Offutt Air Force Base outside of Omaha. From an underground bunker at the Strategic Air Command Base, he convened a National Security Council briefing. As 4 o'clock approached, the president's spokesperson, Karen Hughes, briefed reporters back in Washington.
The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington.
5:21 p.m. Even as people around the country struggled with the enormity of today's events, a third building at the World Trade Center, damaged by this morning's attacks, collapsed.
They advised us to leave because we have... Oh, my God. Look behind us. Please pan in this way, please. Be careful of your baby. This is it.
That's the building coming down.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. No.
Fortunately, the building with more than 40 floors had been evacuated. But once again, the concrete canyons of Lower Manhattan were filled with the sounds of sirens and the sight of people fleeing for their lives.
That's Stone Phillips with a riveting account of all that happened today. And what you see behind me is the scene in Lower Manhattan tonight, live as the rescue efforts do continue. So does the fire and the smoke. 3 buildings now have been collapsed as a result of this terrorist attack today. Let's go to NBC's Pat Dawson, who's been on duty there all day long as we await the President of the United States. Pat, very quickly bring us up to date on recovery efforts.
The recovery efforts at this point, Tom, still pretty much the bottom line is this is a rather chaotic situation here. New York City Fire Department Lieutenant
was just giving us some information a few minutes ago and said that there are still fires burning down there, still some underground fires. He told us that there was a rather significant fire in that building that Stone was just describing, number 7 World Trade Center, that collapsed late in the afternoon. As he said, there are still fires burning there. They are trying at this point to get to those fires and to extinguish them, as well as the task, obviously, of looking for anyone who might possibly have survived, although at this point that is a very, very difficult thing to do in the darkness and the smoke and rubble that this fire lieutenant said runs several stories high in there. Just making a point, or coming on about a point that you mentioned before, as the New York City Firefighters Union saying that fully half of the firefighters originally responding to the events early this morning were killed. That would fit with information that we had gotten from one of the chiefs who was in charge of that operation, saying that he knew he had lost at least 50 to 60 men and probably far fewer that he was not able to evacuate. Tom?
All right, thank you, Pat Dawson, bringing us up to date on the rescue efforts that continue underway as we look at the scenes that have been described all day long by so many people who were there either as a war zone or reminiscent of a nuclear winter. The President of the United States will address the nation, presumably from the Oval Office tonight, after certainly the most hectic day of his presidency, one of the most difficult days of any modern president. He began in Florida earlier, went to Shreveport, addressed the nation from there at Barksdale Air Force Base, then to the Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, to the very secure bunker with all the most sophisticated communications equipment in the world at his disposal for a meeting of the National Security Council. And then he felt strongly that he wanted to come back to the nation's capital, to Washington, D.C. It was symbolically and politically important for him to address the nation from there tonight, that symbol of freedom and power, the Oval Office of the President of the United States in the West Wing of the White House. We'll be sharing with you, after we hear from the President, also the appearance tonight on the steps of the Capitol of the House and Senate members who were still in town, Republican and Democrat alike, the leaders. There they are, and after their statement by their leaders, they broke into this spontaneous rendition of God Bless America. In the Oval Office, we expect to hear from him momentarily.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
President George W. Bush, in his second address to the nation, and certainly the most grave speech that he has made in his very young presidency, as he talked tonight about the terrorists attempting to shatter steel in buildings but not being successful in shattering the steel of resolve in this country, saying the bright light of freedom will continue to burn. He was a sorrowful and sober president, but also one filled with resolve, as he said, we will find the people who are responsible for this and bring them to justice. This has been a long and difficult day for the president, and it's just the beginning because there are many complex decisions that remain ahead of him now. NBC's Tim Russert joins me now from the Washington Bureau, where he is our Washington Bureau chief and moderator of Meet the Press. Tim, the president tomorrow will obviously be sending out a lot of directives to his military, to his law enforcement officers, and also to the people who are responsible for this nation's security at airports and in other places.
Tom, the president cast this tonight as a battle between good and evil, using the word evil several times. Law enforcement officials and intelligence officials hope that with the cockpit recorders, airport records, and perhaps even some celebrations or proclamations by those who did this, they can quickly determine just who must be retaliated against. The president also said something very important, Tom. Whoever harbors these terrorists will be dealt with in the same way as those who committed the terrorism. That is a very important signal and message to people all across the world. Tom, there's a steely resolve in Washington, a passionate determination to bring these people to justice, but there's also a sober realization that our way of life will change forever.
All right, NBC's Tim Russert, who's our Washington Bureau Chief. Tim, we're going to ask you to stand by there tonight. I want to go to Richard Holbrooke now, who has been one of our most skilled negotiators and veteran diplomats. He was obviously deeply involved in the Dayton Peace Accords. He was the man who made that happen and tried to bring some sense of peace to the Balkans. Around the world, Mr. Holbrooke, there seems to be this dividing line between Islamic fundamentalists and the United States, not just in the Middle East, but of course in the central part of Europe and in the southeast part of Asia as well.
First of all, I think it's very important to make clear that not
when you say Islamic fundamentalists, you're not talking about all people who follow Islam as a religion, and I know you and I share that, Tom. But I agree with what Tim Russert just said. The most important sentence in the President's fine speech, which we've all just listened to and which I think the world should understand the President has spoken for the entire nation, regardless of party. The most important sentence in the President's speech was the phrase, "We make no distinction between those who committed the act and those who harbor the people who committed it." And it is absolutely critical now that the United States rally an international coalition so that we don't go it alone in seeking out these people. If, as you have been reporting, it comes from Osama bin Laden, and if the Taliban have left him in their country, they must suffer the consequences. And we're going to need the support of our European allies, of the Russians, the Chinese, and of the Arab moderate states like Egypt and Jordan, which all must join us in the effort to eradicate this scourge that is upon us. As Tim Russert said, it's going to be difficult, but it is something that we must do with other countries to isolate the people who did it.
Richard, no one knows better than you that that's a daunting diplomatic assignment. The last time that that happened successfully, we had a highly conspicuous presence in Saddam Hussein, who had moved into Kuwait, and President George Herbert Walker Bush, this president's father, and his very skilled team did manage to put together an extraordinary alliance. Will it be more difficult this time?
It will be more difficult, Tom, for a reason that's quite clear. We know what the act of war was, and it is an act of war, but not only do we not know exactly who did it, although we have our suspicions, but finding them will be much more difficult than driving an overt, highly visible force out of Kuwait. And we must remember that it took George Bush Sr. 7 long months from August 1st, 1990 until the beginning of 1991 before he launched that military attack. The American public and the world is going to want some kind of action earlier than that, but we'll have to know who it must be directed against. Still, the President's critical statement just now that we'll make no distinction between those who did it and those who are harboring the men who did it is, I think, a big first step towards changing the rules of the game so that people like this can no longer hide behind the kind of horrible behavior that the Taliban have shown in this situation.
Richard Holbrooke, our former ambassador to the United Nations, former ambassador to Germany, a leading State Department authority, and the principal architect of the Dayton Peace Accords for Bosnia. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Tom.
General Norman Schwarzkopf, of course, knows a good deal about putting together an alliance and striking back hard in the Persian Gulf War. He was the commander of the Allied forces there, but this is a far different situation.
You can point to it in many different places, and it's come to our shores big time now. We need to understand that.
I know that you still have many contacts in the Arab world among the moderate Arab states. Do you think that they will be willing to stand beside the United States now in a conspicuous fashion against this kind of terrorism?
That's going to be very, very tough for them to do. Very, very tough, because, of course, in doing so, the terrorists have always justified their acts against any United States facility because of what the United States support of Israel. And quite frankly, for them to stand up now and support the United States 100% is going to put them in a very, very difficult position with vis-a-vis Israel, because most of those states are anti-Israel.
All right, thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who's with us tonight as well. Ambassador Richard Holbrooke did make a very appropriate point, because the reaction in this country will be, in many quarters, to lash out at all people of Islamic faith, all practicing Muslims, and there are about 7 million in this country altogether, many of them in the Detroit area, but also throughout the eastern seaboard as well. That would be a grievous error on the part of the United States, because many of these Islamic countries have been the targets of the same kind of terrorism. Egypt particularly, and Saudi Arabia has not been happy with some of the attacks that have been made in that country as well. These are people who operate like loose bands of guerrillas, and they have their own kind of demented and perverted view of what the Islamic faith is all about, and they attempt to gain their revenge against what they describe as their satanic enemies like the United States through these kinds of acts of cowardly terrorism. The Islamic faith is the fastest growing faith in the world, and it's one that cannot be ignored by this country in so many different dimensions. Let's go to NBC's Jim Miklashevsky now, who's at the Pentagon. Jim, we know that American military forces are on worldwide alert of the highest order tonight. Anything else for us?
Well, officials here at the Pentagon also at the highest state of alert, Delta, which is essentially virtually at a war footing, Tom, where American military are supposed to be geared up, weapons locked and loaded, ready for absolutely everything. But it's been a full 11 hours since that American Airlines 757 slammed into the Pentagon, and firefighters are having a very difficult time with the stubborn blaze. As you can see behind me now, what were just a couple of flickers on the roof are actually now full-blown infernos, apparently. Flames bursting through the roof, even more so just in the last few minutes as we've been standing here watching, and much further away now than the original fires that we had watched several hours ago. So it appears that the fires here in the Pentagon are not only stubborn, but spreading. At the same time, television crews were permitted in the area just a short time ago, and they recorded a very grisly scene, Tom. What they first saw were some of the dead that had been removed from the rubble, covered in sheets. There's a temporary morgue actually set up in the center courtyard of the Pentagon here. The exact casualty toll still not known, but scores are believed to be dead and still buried underneath the rubble. And there was also some shots of the damage, exterior damage around the building itself. As you can see from the pictures, it's eerily reminiscent, Tom, of the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City. The wide gash in the building and the slanted floors that had just collapsed under their own pressure, and it appears that these rescue workers are a long way from not only containing the blaze but recovering the victims. Tom?
I find that stunning, Jim Miklashevsky, that they've had all day to work on that blaze. It tells you about the very grievous nature of this attack on that building, that they still have flames at this hour burning through the military headquarters of the United States.
Well, actually, Tom, you know, some consider the location where this plane went in rather fortunate, because exactly where the plane went in was an area that had recently been redeveloped and redesigned with very heavy blast walls and firewalls in that new area there. Of course, can't withstand the kind of impact of a 757. So as you look at the building, the fire did not spread very much to the right, the new portion of the building, and the old portion where the fire continues to spread, much of that had already been vacated. Those offices vacated in preparations of the remodeling effort that was to be undertaken in that section of the building. Even though the death toll here is likely to still rise significantly, the number of dead is probably considerably less than it would have been if this part of the Pentagon had been up to full staff. Tom?
And Jim, a lot of people are going to be looking at all that destruction and wonder whether our military capability is in any way compromised by the damage to the building here.
Well, fortunately, too, this is exactly the opposite side of all the critical command centers in the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense's office, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs office, the National Military Command, the tank, you've been there, Tom, where some of the most critical military decisions are made. Fortunately, they were all on the other side of the building, and Secretary Rumsfeld never left the building today. After surveying some of the damage, actually helping some of the injured out on stretchers, he returned, not to his office, but the National Military Command Center to coordinate any kind of military assessments and operations that may be underway. Tom, one indication that some plans are already being considered. 2 aircraft carriers were recently in the Persian Gulf, the Enterprise, the Carl Vinson. The Enterprise had left the Persian Gulf, was scheduled to leave the area, head home, and the Navy has told, the Pentagon has told the Enterprise, stay right where you are.
Jim, we do know that the Air Force One had a fighter plane escort when it returned today from the Omaha to Washington leg. Do you think that that might be routine for the foreseeable future?
I would guess that probably will be routine. I mean, we saw the extraordinary scene over here earlier today of American fighter jets, F-16, flying low-level cover over the Capitol and the Pentagon. And I think there will be extraordinary security measures, not only implemented around this building, and they have been stiffened just recently, Tom. All the outside windows have been equipped with Kevlar coating to guard against blast. This portion of the building that have been remodeled, heavy blast walls put in. So they were in the process of trying to make this building terror-proof. It was proven today that that may never be possible.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Jim Miklashevsky, who is at the Pentagon tonight. Now let's go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell, who covers the diplomatic front and national security matters for us as well. Colin Powell, is he back in the nation's capital tonight, Andrea?
Yes, he is back. He had cut short his trip to South America, flew directly from Lima, Peru, back to Washington, and is now at the State Department. He went to meetings with his top team. They were waiting there on the 7th floor of the State Department for him. So he came back without going to Bogota, Colombia. But intelligence officials and others are all, as you know, mobilizing to try to find the culprits. U.S. officials have briefed some members of Congress. What we're learning now from Senator Orrin Hatch, who is a key member of the Judiciary Committee, is that they did have intelligence intercepts. So after the attack, they did pick up some intercepts, and you know the sophistication of the National Security Agency and their ability to intercept communications worldwide, and they zero in, they target bin Laden's operation routinely. They picked up intercepts with some members of his organization apparently referring to these targets having been hit. They've been successful in the past building cases against bin Laden by picking up this kind of information, these kinds of communications. They also believe that at least one person on one of the 4 doomed flights may have been a member of his organization. So as disastrous as this is, they will have leads from people checking into airports, checking on those flights. They know some of the pseudonyms, the aliases, the fake identifications that are used by some of these people. They've probably got a pretty good head start tonight. George Tenet and his officials are all gathered at the CIA in secure areas and are having meetings as we speak.
Andrea Mitchell, are you picking up anything about sending emissaries around the world in an effort to build what has been described as an extraordinary coalition of people, try to build an alliance against the idea of terrorism, because it's not just the Western democracies that are being threatened by all of this, but as you well know, many of the moderate Arab states have been targets as well.
And as Dick Holbrooke and General Schwarzkopf were talking to you earlier, it's very clear that we are at a very weak moment diplomatically in the Arab world and in the Gulf region. Our best allies, including Saudi Arabia, top leaders have been blunt in telling President Bush and communicating privately with his father, who is, of course, very popular in that area, and talking to other U.S. officials about how displeased they are about the situation with the U.S., Israel, and the Palestinians. So there is very little support. Bin Laden is a hero, is in many ways an idol to many people on the street in the Palestinian areas. So while we have to be very careful to make those distinctions with Islamic fundamentalists who have nothing at all to do with Osama bin Laden, to radicals in the region, he is a hero. And
the tower bursting into flames, sending black billowing smoke and debris into the air, adding to the scene of horror already unfolding.
Not for this job. Not for this job. It's not working. We thought it was an earthquake. We were on the 10th floor. The whole thing was shaking, swaying like you wouldn't believe. Then we all went into the hallways. We ran down the stairs.
The impact, I thought it was a bomb. Just lifted everybody off our seats, and we were screaming.
Unfortunately, there was a lot of people jumping from the building.
We saw so many people jump. It's unreal.
It was the worst, most tragic thing I've ever, could ever imagine.
As the steady streams of emergency response teams raced to the scene, the second tower, weakened by the crash, collapsed, filling the skies above the city with a fine gray dust. A short time later, Tower 1 went. City officials say thousands were injured. They expect the death toll will not be known until tomorrow at the earliest, as rescue efforts continue. Shirley John of Brooklyn says she was buried alive by falling rubble.
I was on my way to work, and the dust come down and cover us. We had to feel our way out from the dust. It's just bad.
Also relieved to be alive, radio reporter Hernando Reyes, who was struck by falling debris while covering this disaster.
And then everything is collapsed. And we run, I'm run. And then I jump to the floor.
The mass evacuation from Lower Manhattan continued throughout the day. New York is a city in lockdown. With no mass transit to the area, workers and residents set off on foot. Thousands walked across the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges, as well as the northbound lanes of the FDR Drive. Anxious to get out of harm's way, many looking forward to reaching the safety of home.
I'm going to try to get to Grand Central and walk from there, but it's like a war zone further down. I mean, I want to say it's like a movie, but it's not. I mean, it's just a surreal feeling.
In Lower Manhattan, I'm Pauline Liu for the WB11 News.
A lot of people walking over the bridges today. I mentioned earlier that I got here by coming over the 59th Street Bridge, and you could see the towers burning downtown and people just flooding over the bridge from Manhattan trying to get to the outer boroughs.
And you got a sense in Pauline's report there of the hysteria that people were understanding.
Because we heard people screaming for help. There was a man, he was the fire deputy warden for the building, Mr. Spellman, and he was hiding, huddled in his office behind the wall.
Now, when you say the building, which one is it?
The building the second building that collapsed.
Okay.
Okay.
Right after that building collapsed, it was like deserted. Everybody ran for cover. A lot of people were injured or hurt. A lot of people couldn't breathe. So for us that were around the block, we came running the other way. We went inside the building because we knew people were trapped. We were trying to find firemen, police officers, whoever could be there, civilians. We heard
What time was this, officer? What time?
It had to be, it was around 10 o'clock in that area.
10 a.m.
Well, when the second building collapsed, whatever time that was.
That was right about 10.
When you're in an emergency situation, time means nothing at that point.
Right.
And you just hear, I heard a lot of people screaming, a lot of people saying, help me, help me. And you try to find them, you try to get to them. It's very dark. There's a lot of smoke, a lot of soot. You can't breathe. It's very scary. There's cars were blowing up left and right. All the police cars and emergency service vehicles were on fire. They were all blowing up. We got Mr. Spellman out, brought him over to the ambulance. We raced back in there because we heard a woman screaming. There was another explosion, and the front entrance just got cut off. So we ran to the other side, and at that point, we all lost each other. And I guess I got stuck in the building for about a good 3 hours. And I ended up trying to find some kind of security over in a closet that was on the 5th floor in the kitchen area for a while. And the street caved in on the side. And when the street caved in, it felt like the building was just going to start tipping. And at that point, it was just, you heard all the firemen running through the hallways, getting out, and one of the firemen discovered me because I was like half in and out of consciousness, and they grabbed me and brought me out. If it wasn't for them, I don't really believe that I honestly would have made it out of there today.
What are your injuries tonight?
I have a busted kneecap. I have injuries to my left wrist. They just put a cast on it. And
what can you tell us about the fate of the hundreds of other police and fire
there are a lot
officers?
of people buried. A lot of people got, but nobody believed. When that first building collapsed, I think everybody was relieved, but nobody believed that the second building was going to collapse, so everybody resumed their duties, and we got closer to the building. Nobody ever thought that building was going to collapse today.
Officer, which unit are you with the NYPD?
Brooklyn Central Booking.
So you're with a regular unit that normally does not handle emergency situations?
Correct.
They just dragged everyone in?
Well, I was off duty, going to headquarters for something else, and when I saw what was going on, your basic instinct is to go and help. That's how you do it in the police department. You run to cover and you run to help whoever you can help in an emergency. It don't make a difference what unit you're from anymore. That goes out the window. You're out there to help the public, and that's what we do.
So obviously those voices you heard were probably people buried under the rubble and the steel.
They were people buried under the rubble, and to tell you the truth, you honestly and truthfully could not get to them. And it hurts you because you're trying so hard to find where that voice is coming from, and you can't do it because the rubble is so piled high, and the smoke is so strong, and the voice gets fainter and fainter. And it's a very emotional time when you know that you want to help somebody and you can't get in there.
Do you feel, Officer Esposito, like you have even begun the process of processing, internalizing what you've seen, what you've heard today, what's happened to you?
This will have an effect on me for the rest of my life. I've never in my life have ever dreamed that I would see anything like this. You see it in the movies. It's totally different than the movies when you're there and all of a sudden you just see a building collapse around you and there's nowhere to go for cover. Nowhere.
Now, there were thousands of people obviously working in the building, but there were also hundreds of emergency personnel working for the fire department and the police department. Any sense of how many of them were buried inside or outside under the collapses?
It's got to be a couple of hundred. There's got to be, because when the first building collapsed, everybody mustered back towards the building to try to get everybody else out and evacuate the building quickly. The second building collapsed without warning. It just, all of a sudden, the earth shook. It sounded like an explosion type of thing, and literally the building disconnected from itself and just fell, and the pieces just started scattering, and you saw the pieces jumping off the buildings, and people were just running as fast as they could for cover. But there wasn't much, you know, for those that couldn't run fast enough, there wasn't much you could do. There was just no cover.
So the second collapse, you were on the 5th floor at that point?
No, the second collapse, we were still outside. We were outside. We went in after the second collapse.
So you went in knowing that the building was collapsing around you?
Yes, because we heard voices. You can hear people screaming, "Help me." And, you know, your instinct is to help somebody. That's our instinct on the police department, is to help somebody, and that's what everybody was trying to do, just help each other.
Well, Officer Esposito, a very brave job you and your colleagues did. Just the notion of you running into the building as everyone else is trying to run away from it says something about your bravery and your dedication and your sacrifice that you've made. We're very glad you're alive. Best of luck in your recovery.
Thank you very much.
Coverage. Good luck, officer.
Thank you.
We now have a report from Ann McDermott, who will tell us about the nation, the entire nation, watching the events today unfold, looking on with horror.
The pictures were just so insane that all these University of Southern California students could do was stare. But the younger ones had questions, lots of questions.
But when I first saw on the news, I sort of wondered how protected we really are in America. Think they'll be able to catch all the people involved?
Their teacher, for once, had no answers.
How? Why? These are the questions.
And here's one more.
Do you think anything like this would ever happen again?
Will it happen again? Psychologists say that's what can make people so crazy at first.
It's not that we're afraid of the unknown. In the face of the unknown, we fill it in. We think there are monsters out there, and we actually end up frightening ourselves more.
Many of these people in an LA area gym admitted they were frightened.
Smashing into the World Trade. This was a coordinated act. This was not the act of a single madman. In some other accounts, as many as 3 hijackers were on board a single plane. And as we know here, these are the lasting images that we're going to see before the aftermath and the worst pictures that we're about to see. We're going to see pictures of people, loved ones, before they were on that crash. The toll and reading all the numbers and all the names more appropriately and the faces and the life stories of these people, especially if, as all indications unfortunately point to, it will be in the thousands. It'll take hours here, but it's going to take a lot longer than hours to more than just read the bios of the people and the families they left behind. But it's also going to take much longer than that to, we'll never make sense out of this, but it's going to take a lot longer than that to regain the way of life that we all enjoyed at 8:30 this morning. You're seeing right there firefighters just, you know, push to the point of both exhaustion and to the point where they couldn't breathe because of all of, as you see there, the billowing smoke that came out. 400 firefighters went into the 2 World Trade Center buildings to try and save and rescue people, and from all accounts, they succeeded with unbelievable courage and valor in bringing many people out to their safety. But of the 400 firefighters who went in, only half came out. From all the accounts that we have right now, 200 firefighters are presumed dead just from that rescue mission alone. We don't know on the ground how many more may have perished. We hope the number is negligible, if not 0. 78 law enforcement officials, police officers who also bravely fought to both control the situation as well as going in for rescue at the scene. They're right now considered missing, and many people believe that missing status will go to a presumption of death, unfortunately, in the very near future. And the worst part of all this, all these numbers that I'm bringing you, these are the preliminary numbers that I had about an hour or so ago. They're expected to increase significantly with time, and the numbers that nobody wants to bring you, and the numbers that we're never going to know in the next day, the next days, in the next weeks, because of all people associated with this. There'll be bodies that will be beyond recognition. There'll be missing bodies here that will be going on probably into perpetuity, but it's going to be numerous thousands by most accounts here. So, the idea of closure after tonight is an extremely hopeful one, and frankly one that's delusionary. There will be no closure tonight. By most accounts, there will be no closure tomorrow. All of downtown Manhattan will be shut down. It will be a ghost town except for the rescue workers trying to find hopeful survivors out of this. But unfortunately, they're going to be met with grim realities of the people who lost their lives in this senseless act of tragedy this morning. So, you have a closed Manhattan tomorrow. You have the flights grounded till at least noon tomorrow at the earliest. You have Washington that moves bravely ahead here and attempts to try and restore order and not let terrorists dictate the agenda of the nation, as Congress will reconvene tomorrow with a special session. You'll also have the Pentagon, even though it itself was attacked today. We understand over 100 people either killed or injured, some very seriously here. They will also return fully to work, as you see the video there before you. That famous Pentagon-shaped building that was seen by many as basically the symbol here of impenetrable strength here for our defense. That, again, was shattered again today.
Mr. Butcher will clear all of that up for us when he does start to talk to us, but we do hear the same thing, no flights until at least noon tomorrow. Right now, everything shut down. We're also told that getting in and out of the city, as you know, has been impossible all day, and as a matter of fact, now they're not allowing anyone in except for uniformed police officers and military vehicles. So everything completely shut down still and until at least noon tomorrow, and we're hoping that we can clear that up and bring you some more details momentarily.
Of course, when the bombs went off here, the airliners hit the World Trade Center this morning. When it became obvious this was an act of terror, the first thing that the city did was close down the bridges and tunnels to save them, to make certain that there weren't additional terror attacks that would take out the bridges and tunnels and leave New York completely isolated, Manhattan anyway. Gradually over the day, there was some opening to allow people who were in Manhattan to leave. And it's still possible over certain bridges and tunnels to leave Manhattan either on foot and in some cases in vehicles. But you're telling us still nobody is allowed in except uniformed personnel?
Right. That's the very latest that we heard. No one allowed in except for uniformed personnel, people who are directly needed. Earlier today, as I was driving in myself, they were waving people through. If you were a cop, if you were a paramedic or a firefighter, they were waving you through, uniform or not, just to obviously help in the rescue and recovery. For now, I'm told they're not letting anyone through unless you are a uniformed officer being called in for duty or unless you are in some sort of Army or military vehicle. So still, everything is shut down. And here is, we're told now, we will be starting in another 2 minutes. This is the Port Authority press officer, and we're expecting to hear from the Chief Operating Officer, Ernesto Butcher. He will tell us all the very latest on the airport's bridges and tunnels in just a few moments.
Yeah, you know, it was interesting, Darlene. I drove in from Connecticut this morning. I got as far as the 225th Street Bridge in the Bronx and the Kingsbridge section, and nobody was being allowed through as of about 9:30. But then by about 4:30 today, they opened that bridge for traffic moving south. That opening lasted for about a half an hour, and then they closed the bridge down once again.
Right. It's been a fluid situation all day. There were times where they were letting people out of the city early on, but no one in. Then they were letting some vehicles in. And as I told you, there were frantic police officers and fire officials who seemed to be off duty in plain clothes, standing at the bridges and tunnels, waving you through if you were a cop or some sort of emergency service personnel, just hoping that anyone who could get in would be allowed in to help out. They are still preparing this news conference here, but we will hear shortly on about what they're going to do for tomorrow. We obviously want to know about the morning rush and what's going to happen. We want to know if the entire city will be shut down and who's going to be allowed through, and whether you can come in through a bridge or a tunnel, or whether you can come in by subway. We don't know. Right now, the Port Authority here is shut down as well. There is no travel here at all at this station either. We're at Penn Station, and we simply do not know.
When you even think about the news conference that's about to occur, which will give us some idea of what life is going to be like for all of us, you have to think about what a profound effect a handful of dedicated radicals can have on an entire nation. This nation is at a standstill at the moment. Air traffic is at a standstill. The borders are sealed. There's very little travel going on, and that affects every single part of this country.
Financial markets closed, right.
And of course, the schools tomorrow in New York City are now, there was a decision made to close the schools. The financial markets, as you said, Michelle, won't be open tomorrow, perhaps Wednesday. They'll be open again. The financial system, we are told, of course, by the president and by the mayor of the city, is in fine shape. There is no problem there. There is no need to think about hoarding money or food if you're in Manhattan. There's no problem there. But at the moment, transportation is stalled while the mop-up continues and the dimension of the threat is measured. Darlene, what's going on behind you now?
Oh, well, they seem to be still setting up. There's a podium here behind me. All the media is here. We've all been waiting. As you can see, reporters are standing by. The press officer seems to be getting things together here. And we're hoping that this gentleman comes down soon. Obviously, everyone is very curious in the city outside. It's eerie how quiet it is around here. 8th Avenue, we're right near Times Square, which is usually...
To try and bring some clarity to what happened here. Imagine on the 92nd floor of the World Trade Center, and it's so bad that you jump to your death. Well, those still pictures worth seeing.
If I can try to articulate it without having to show those pictures, you have to imagine that some of those people were trapped in areas where there was fire, where there was smoke. Some were probably trying to get clean outside the areas that were hit just so they can get clean air. And at some point, some were going to be burned, continue to be burned and not have a choice. Others would realize they were breathing in the air and not have much of a choice. But when you see those bodies, first you see the debris coming down, you think it's just debris, and then all of a sudden you see something that looks a little bit different, and it falls out of the building like a doll, and then it smacks against the towers as it comes down, and then when you see it hit a lamppost and shatter, it'll explain why, as you've heard some of the other viewers talk about, the anger that people will have.
Bill, our thoughts will be with you and yours. Take good care. Glad you're okay tonight.
Thanks.
We want to go to Sophia Thomas. I was telling you earlier, and throughout the day I've been mentioning this woman who was on the 92nd floor of Tower Number 2, walked down 92 floors, got out of there before she would have been caught up in all of it. Her name is Sophia Thomas, and she's on the line with us now. Sophia, good to talk to you. Sophia Thomas, are you with us on the phone? I guess we've just lost her on the line. That sort of thing does happen. Commissioner Safer, there are going to be a lot of stories of heroes and miracles coming out of this mess down there.
Absolutely, and not just police and firefighters. There are citizens who came out to help and who were incredibly brave, helping people get out of the World Trade Center, helping people get out of the area after the debris was falling. We know that our firefighters are here and police officers are heroes who go into danger every day, but there were incredible acts by citizens as well.
I don't know how much of this is coincidence, but they've all mounted up so much that it seems to me it's worth mentioning. These are live pictures in downtown Manhattan as we realize that this particular bombing happened 3 months to the day since the execution of Timothy McVeigh, almost to the minute. It happened on 9/11, September the 11th of the year 2001. It happened on the day before an associate of Osama bin Laden was to have been sentenced in federal court in Lower Manhattan at a courthouse right across the street from the World Trade Center. 4 planes hijacked simultaneously, all coming off their scheduled transcontinental routes, loaded with fuel, which makes them flying bombs, and headed directly for the first plane, directly for Tower number 1 of the World Trade Center, and then this second one for Tower number 2, and right into it, the nose coming out the other side. Minutes later, a similar situation at the Pentagon. Similar situation happening at the Pentagon, and one plane that, as it turned out, did not end up crashing into its destination, but instead crashed in Pittsburgh, or outside Pittsburgh, as Britt Human described it earlier, working its way toward what it looked like the Washington, D.C. area. I'm getting word from the booth now that there is an Associated Press urgent that has just come out on victims. I don't see that urgent. Is it in Associated Press urgent, or is it a AP? Attacks airline victims has just crossed. We're learning a bit more now about who may have died. American Airlines Flight 11, which was the Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles before it veered into the World Trade Center. The crew now has been listed. Worth mentioning at least some of them. John Ogunsawi, who's 52, from Dracut, Mass., the pilot. Tom McGinnis, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the co-captain. Sarah Lowe from Batesville, Arkansas, a flight attendant, plus a short list of passengers as well. David Angle, 54, of Pasadena. Lynn Angle of Pasadena. Edmund Glazier of Chatsworth, California. Daniel C. Lewin, who's listed here as co-founder of the Cambridge, Mass.-based Acme Technologies. Tara Kramer, 30 years old, of Worcester, Mass., works at TJX. Ted Hennessy of Belmont, Massachusetts. The list from United Airlines, Flight 175. Victor Saraceni, lower makeup from Township, Pennsylvania, the pilot. Al Marchand of New Mexico. People from across America who were inside these planes, all losing their lives in the skies. And we've talked repeatedly about Barbara Olson, who was on a flight out of Dulles that would have taken her transcontinental. Barbara Olson calling her husband Ted, not once but twice, describing what looked like knives in the hands of those who were on board her plane before it crashed into the United States Pentagon and sent the United States into the worst act of terror ever known on planet Earth. That's the explosion now into what was the World Trade Center, the 2 towers of 110 stories, which no longer exist in Lower Manhattan. The former police commissioner with us. I wonder now what this is going to do to all of our heads.
Well, I think it has to have what I believe is the effect of making this country resolve that we're going to deal with terrorism once and for all. And the way you deal with terrorism once and for all is you get rid of the source. And I think this is a case where we have to identify who did this, we have to find them, and we have to either bring them to justice or eliminate them.
We haven't shown a great ability to be able to get at these people of late. We really haven't. Well, I mean, CNN can interview the guy.
This is a...
But our military, we can't find him. Our intelligence can't find him.
This is an intelligence failure, but I don't blame it on the intelligence community. I blame it right back to Senator Church when he decimated the CIA at those hearings.
I thought we were waiting there for our Fox News stations to join us up and down the line. Now 5 minutes before 10 o'clock in the east, 5 minutes before 7 in the west. I'm Shepard Smith in New York, and this is Fox News' continuing coverage of attack on America, terrorism on American soil, thousands believed to be dead in Lower Manhattan, thousands upon thousands now trapped beneath the rubble of what was the World Trade Center, the 210-story towers reduced to rubble, a 42-story building called Building Number 7, which is right there in the World Financial Center, also reduced to rubble as 2 jets plowed into the side of them. Similar situation at the Pentagon in Washington. Our Washington managing editor, Britt Hume, is with us from there. Britt.
Be back up and running and in business tomorrow. Officials at the Pentagon are saying that that agency is functioning, even though it is still on fire. Secretary of Defense was there and functioned from there through most of the day. The president is back at the White House tonight, and it was from the White House, of course, that he addressed the nation earlier. Other departments said to be up and running and open for business tomorrow. An effort, a strong and strenuous effort to display unity has been seen here in Washington in this day. My senior White House correspondent and colleague, Jim Angle, has been with us through the day.
Just mad. Just anger. What do people go through?
With a situation like this, you're going to have a mix of stages. It's a myth that there's stage 1, 2, 3, and it's nice and orderly. It isn't. Stage 2, which we're all experiencing, is post-traumatic stress syndrome. Everyone's heard about it. Let me make it simple. The brain goes on alert to protect us. That means we have so much adrenaline, we're not going to sleep well, we're not going to eat well, we're going to startle easily. At the same time, we're in stage 3 when we have conflicting feelings. We feel happy we're alive, we feel guilty that we feel happy, we feel loss, and we feel anger all at the same time.
Yeah. Dr. George Woodkin, thank you. All right, 8 minutes before the hour.
Hi, right now, Colin Spencer is going to provide the latest from Washington, D.C. Collins, good morning again.
Good morning to you all. Well, after yesterday's evacuation here on Capitol Hill,
well, I have a broken kneecap and my wrist is broken. They've knocked me back because I really don't remember anything except waking up and trying to grab the firemen for help.
Officer, help us understand the mindset of someone like yourself and other rescue workers who forgo their own health and risk their own lives to get back in there and help others, because so many people, and for obvious reasons, become so concerned with themselves and their loved ones, and as you said, it's complete chaos and they're running for their lives, and people like yourself and others take a moment to check on their own health and then turn right back around.
You took the job because you wanted to help people and you wanted to save lives, and that's why we took the job. And you don't, in an emergency like this, you don't think about anything else but the fact that there are innocent people and there are people hurting, and you need to find them. And that's all you think about. You don't think about anything else except that there are innocent people hurting, whether they be police officers, firemen, or civilians. You know that they're buried in the rubble, and that's all you care about at the moment. You don't, it's spontaneous. It's instant spontaneous. And 16 years after being 16 years on the police department, you just become spontaneous to help somebody. You don't think about anything else but the fact that you have to get in there and help them. That's all you think about. And after it's all over, you say to yourself, wow, I really went in there and did that. I had to be crazy. But if it happened again, I would do it again tomorrow, because that's our job. That's what you get paid to do, and that's what you have to do. And you just feel it in your heart that that's the right thing, and I have no regrets. Listen, the 74-year-old man might have not have been alive today. So I have to think about that and say to myself, well, at least I saved him. The rest of them, there was really nothing you can do, but you can't imagine being inside that building hearing the yells. You just can't imagine the yelling and the screaming inside the building for people to find you. They want you to find them, and you can't because the rubble is piled up. The whole inside of the building caved in, and the outside wall stood, but the whole inside of the building was caved in. It was like watching a movie and being in the movie scene, and there's all of the parts of the building just piled on top and people in between.
Only this was no movie, as you know, as you say, and the debris that fell around you, the fact that you got knocked out unconscious was all very real. We're looking live now at a picture of firefighters on a ladder truck spraying water at the rubble, the remains, the steel, the girders, the glass.
Trying to put out any hot spots and try to do whatever they can to allow other crews to go in there and pull away some of that wreckage in hopes of finding any survivors.
Officer Esposito, you are indeed a hero in all of our eyes. There's no doubt about it. We're glad you're here with us. We wish you the best as you recover from your broken kneecap and your broken wrist. And again, be proud exactly that you saved that 74-year-old man.
Thank you. And my prayers go out to all of the people that are waiting to find out about their loved ones. Thank you.
As do ours. Be well.
Thank you.
I know.
Time right now is 8:57. Officer Esposito, so many heroes, so many heroes. He's just one of them. And there are so many, many now with Amy Stone, who is continuing to monitor this story from Chelsea Piers.
With 2 Red Cross volunteers, Amy?
We are with Adrian and Jack Dianis, who came down here yesterday, and they were down. You were really in the heart of the rubble. What was your job there?
Our job, as volunteers, was to set up a triage center, give out food and water, very important to these firemen who are just too tired to even come get it. We would bring it to them. Just help moving rubble, clearing ways, cleaning out their eyes.
We're out here outside Chelsea Piers, Pier 61, which is a makeshift morgue right now. There are 5 refrigerated trucks on the ice rink, the Sky Rink at Chelsea Piers, which is usually known for its fun and games, and today it is a makeshift morgue. It is also a surgical and medical unit. There are dozens and dozens of surgeons inside, and physician's assistants and nurses, and the Red Cross is here, and they are pleading with people, if you can bring down to Chelsea Piers any clean, well, they don't have to be clean, they just have to be dry socks, sweatpants, any kind of sweatshirts, because a lot of these firefighters are wet and they need dry clothes. Is that right?
Yes, there's at least a foot of soot that we have to walk through to go around buildings, and their feet are getting wet, and they got blisters, they just need dry socks.
You also mentioned you did see them pulling bodies from the wreckage, and you said they were doing it very respectfully.
Absolutely. They're working in a part of the building that we can't get anywhere near. We're right outside it, but they are putting the bodies, which we assume, right into the bags and carrying it out. We don't see any of that. And into, you know, the way that the morgue is in the American Express building there, which is where we are, right on the opposite.
And half the backside of that building's gone.
Half that building is gone.
I'm hearing also from people inside that they say a lot of these bodies are also being taken to Ellis Island right now. Several bodies have been placed there. What did you do yesterday that made you come out and made you volunteer, made you be a Red Cross volunteer? This is kind of new for you guys, isn't it?
Yeah, just seeing it on the news and feeling that we had to come out and help.
And how do you feel? I know you're exhausted right now, but it must feel good to give back.
Yeah, it's good to get home. We need to get home, get a shower, but volunteering is important. We had to do a duty, you know. We had to help these guys, and they were very appreciative that we did what we did.
All right, we're going to stop talking and let you go home and get some sleep. Thanks for all your help. All right, we're outside Chelsea Piers live. Amy Stone, CBS 2. Back to you, Lisa. Michael.
All right, thanks, Amy. We're going to try to effort the list of the 12 shelters in New York City, the 12 Red Cross shelters that are in New York City. So if you need a shoulder to cry on, if you need a little bit of water, food, drink, clothing perhaps, the Red Cross is there, as you heard from our Amy Stone.
I want to recap what's been going on this morning. If we can bring back the live picture at its 9 o'clock hour right now. We'll just get you caught up to speed, basically, with where we are in the day. We're right now awaiting Mayor Giuliani, who is going to address the city, as well as Senator Clinton, Hillary Clinton. We're trying to get in touch with her as well to try to get an update on where we are, and as far as rescue efforts and what the government is going to provide. Just to get you a little bit more information, there are more than 1,000 firefighters and rescue personnel right now working the scene in Lower Manhattan. As you look live at some of what's being done, ladder companies and cranes and just a sea of twisted metal, crews having to pull away to try to find any survivors. And from all indications and the folks that we have spoken to throughout the morning and last evening, it's the longer this goes, sadly, the more grim the possibilities.
As we heard from Officer Esposito live on the phone, he went into Tower number 1 right after it collapsed. The second building collapsed yesterday morning, and he said that. He said, first thing you heard were all the screams from the people wanting to get help, but he could not find them because it was so dark, it was so smoky, it was impossible to see the people who were there, who were looking for help. And he said that he will always live with the sounds of those people screaming and his inability to help them for the rest of his life.
We've passed the 24-hour mark since the first impact, the first tower by a jet. We are now coming up, though, on 9:03, the time when the second flight, United Flight 175, hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And shortly thereafter, President Bush, you may remember, addressing the country from Florida, where he was speaking to children, saying that this was an apparent terrorist attack on our country. That certainly proved to be the case. It's no longer apparent. Washington confirming that that is the case. And all through the morning, many officials from Washington, Senator McCain, John McCain, Secretary of State Colin Powell, you heard Mayor Giuliani as well, all convinced that this is the work of a terrorist group. They are not saying who, although all fingers now pointing at Osama bin Laden. You're looking at tape of 24 hours ago.
At 8:45 yesterday morning, when the first plane went into Trade Tower building number 1.
And just to the end, to continue the point, the Secretary of State, excuse me, as well as Senator McCain, as you continue to look at further tape, that the first impact there, some of that shot by witnesses, others by professional photographers who were scattering on the ground. The scene shortly thereafter as Twin Towers collapsed, both of them by 10:30 yesterday morning. The federal government doing everything it can to enlist the help of countries worldwide to crack down on terrorist action. They have not said when they would retaliate, because at this point, frankly, they are not certain who the target is. Again, all fingers pointing to suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden, though his remark coming out this morning from an aide close to bin Laden, courtesy of the Associated Press, bin Laden saying that he was happy about what happened to the United States yesterday, but denies any involvement.
At this point, live again at the new skyline, so to speak, of Lower Manhattan, and Paul Ferranges is as close as he can get to Ground Zero, and we're going to go to him live for an update as we approach the 24-hour mark of the second impact, the second plane crash into World Trade Center Tower. Paul, what can you tell us?
Well, Lisa, about 3 minutes ago, a sea of Department of Transportation workers walked down West Street towards the impact zone, towards the debris zone, to do what they can to try to help. Right now, we can't see it on camera, but I can see the state police are here. They've come in about a caravan of about 20 vehicles. I can see at least 12 or 13 K-9 units that are here. They're going to assist in this recovery effort. The resources continue to pour into Lower Manhattan to try to do anything to try to reach the people that may still be trapped alive, and also to recover those who lost their lives in this catastrophic event. West Street is full of emergency vehicles, as it has been all morning long. Smoke continues to billow from what the remains are of Towers 1, 2, and 7. More white smoke now than earlier this morning. It seems that those pockets that they keep finding, they're putting out in a more rapid way than they were earlier. Maybe they're easier to get to. I know that the fire department is keeping somewhat of a safe distance from this fire before they allow emergency crews to go back in and do rescue. But still, West Street, Lower Manhattan is still very, very smoky. A lot of the fire is still burning. We were told by some Con Ed officials that the network down here, or at least probably below Chambers Street, is out. Their substation is below all of that rubble of what once was World Trade 1, 2, and 7. How long it'll take them to restore that grid, I couldn't tell you. They're not speaking officially, but it'll probably take some time. I'm sure they're going to try to do as much as they can to try to get some temporary power down there. Their field office is here. I'm sure they're waiting until they get the okay from rescuers, until all of that debris is secure before they go in and try to attempt any of that. That's the situation from here. Crews and more vehicles, dumpsters, debris is leaving here in truckloads. It's just an ongoing scene. Lisa, Michael?
Real quickly, if you could address a story that we've been following throughout the morning. Maybe some people are joining us in and out as they get their families prepared for the day. We'd been talking earlier about what we thought was some smoke coming out of One World Financial Plaza, and
the rooftop.
The rooftop, right. We saw dark smoke, which indicated to us, and again, purely a novice observation, but because it was dark, we assumed it might be fresh flame. This is a live picture. You can still see some of the darker smoke. We assume that the lighter smoke is the dust from the drywall.
Now it is, right. But there's One World Financial Center Plaza on the right side of your screen, and it's located on West Street between Liberty and VC,
now,
depending on how you pronounce it.
Paul, you still there?
I'm still here, Michael. Okay. I'm watching. There were some people who lived in the Hudson Park Towers complex. I believe that's what it's called. Seems that they've been evacuated from their houses. Maybe they went in there to retrieve some of their things. As far as what we thought was a fire, apparently it wasn't. Apparently it was some sort of generator going. But as you can see now, Chris, maybe you can push in there. There's another puff of dark smoke coming from the remains of 1 and 2. So there must be tons, and there must be several different pockets of flame still smoldering under all the rubble, and as they peel it away, they find another pocket and they put it out. And I'm sure that's slowing down the rescue effort even more. In addition to having to climb through and dig through all that debris, they have to deal with those pockets of fire. So that's the situation here. As far as the World Financial Center, that looks to be fine, but again, the rubble seems to continue to be burning of 1, 2, and
is no longer a friend of the United States. We cannot permit any relationship to go on as it has in the past. If any state or institution within that state, with the approval and forbearance of the government, has funded or supported or in any way given comfort to those who made this attack on us. And clearly, that's going to be a very difficult undertaking. We need to stay absolutely committed, not only in finding the individuals who did this, but those who would come back at us again. And I am going to give the President all of my support in doing what is necessary.
Senator, you heard and saw, I'm sure, PLO leader Yasser Arafat's reaction condemning this attack, yet we also, I'm sure you saw the video of Palestinians cheering and chanting, and reports we were getting were passing out candy in celebration of the attacks. How do you deal with that controversy, so to speak?
Well, I'm outraged, and any decent human being is outraged. You know, there's been enough bloodshed, and we do not need to have anyone believe that this was a victory for any ideology or point of view. It was a terrible loss and a disaster for all of humanity. You know, they may have struck New York and America, but they struck at the heart of what it means to be a human being, as far as I'm concerned. And from my perspective, the misguided and terrible reactions that were broadcast illustrate clearly what we're up against. The depths of both hatred and bigotry and discrimination and attitudes about America, when from every historic perspective, you know, this country has meant more to every single person who's ever lived in the last 200 years in terms of freedom and democracy, is just something we can't tolerate.
But Senator, do you believe Yasser Arafat's sincerity when he condemned the attacks yesterday, or do you think he's just putting up a front?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that we learned some bitter lessons about what his leadership really amounted to over the last year, and I'm very concerned. But right now, I think our focus has to be on the search and rescue missions, on supporting our brave men and women who are on the front lines as firefighters and police officers, emergency technicians, medical personnel, and I will do everything I can to make sure we have every resource we need to not only search and rescue, but to, you know, rebuild and reconstruct.
Senator, the FBI is working some leads. They believe perhaps that this terrorist attack may be linked to Osama bin Laden. Senator Orrin Hatch echoing that sentiment. Your thoughts? Do you view him as the #1 suspect?
Well, I think that there is certainly reason to believe that. You know, I was in the White House when the bombing of our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya took place, when the bombing of the USS Cole took place. I don't think there was any doubt as to who is responsible. But I believe that we need this to be not only an American response, but everyone who expects to be a friend of the United States has to be equally committed to rooting out whoever was responsible.
Senator, take it home on a personal level. Yesterday when the attacks happened, I understand you were at your home in Washington, D.C., and your husband was in Australia. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, because I think a lot of people are wondering where...
Yeah, I was actually, you know, on my way into work, and when I got here to the Capitol, and the second plane had hit the towers, and we were all deeply concerned, I had my office, you know, try to find out whatever information it could, and then we were evacuated. And as you know, I'm sure know, every federal building in Washington was evacuated. Then later in the afternoon, we started to gather again. We had a briefing with most of the senators, and then had our event on the Capitol steps. I'm in my office right now as I speak to you, and I've already had a breakfast meeting with some senators who I've explained what we're up against and what we need, and I'm going to spend my time on the floor with the resolution. There'll be some classified briefings, and then if I'm lucky, I'm going to try to get there later this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
Secretary of State Colin Powell echoing your sentiment exactly, asking for the help from everybody in the world, calling this an attack, an assault against the civilized world. He was talking too about some of the ideas maybe to prevent this from happening again, and you'll discuss that, I'm sure, at length today. But short of closing our society, what can the United States do?
Well, Michael, I think there are a lot of things we have to do. We have to beef up airport security. I mean, how in the world did this happen? You know, there were clearly breaches in security that we have to get to the bottom of. We have to do a much better job at screening who works at airports, who has access to airplanes. We have to be much tougher on the front lines of passenger search and scrutiny. We're going to have to beef up our intelligence resources again. And, you know, I heard the other day, which is, you know, very troubling to me, is that, you know, we have a lot of intelligence information that, you know, we're not adequately able to assess because we don't have the manpower, we don't have people who speak the languages that the information is being conveyed in. You know, we are in a new world, and this is something many of us have warned about for some time, and that's why we have to focus first and foremost on protecting our country, our homeland defense, and there's going to be a big debate about that, and it'll be a healthy debate, but we're also going to have to look at extremist activities and cells that are functioning in the United States, take a much harder line on that. So there are a lot of things we need to be doing.
Senator Clinton, thank you so much for joining us this morning from Washington.
Producers go by that location in Germany, in Hamburg, and as they arrived, the German police were just arriving, and the German police were taking out boxes of evidence there. So at this point, the authorities are focusing considerably on Florida, here on the East Coast in Coral Springs, as well as the flying school, and they're trying to connect the dots. The last thing I have, which just sort of shows that they have been in the country for some time, was that they enrolled last July into the Venice Flying School, and they really completed their training there in January, even though they had actually gotten their commercial ratings in November and December. They wrapped up in January. So at this point, the FBI is going to be possibly saying something out of Miami a little bit later today, Tom, but there's no confirmation on that yet.
And do we have any idea on how they were in this country? Were they on a tourist visa? Have they applied for a green card? Have they just slipped in here undocumented in some fashion and then hid out?
All very good questions, questions that the FBI is rapidly going through paperwork and trying to resolve, but at this point there's no answer to that.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Kerry Sanders. A nifty piece of detective work down there in Florida. Two of these men were trained as pilots in Florida last fall, and the man who examined their capabilities said that they would be able to, once a Boeing 757 got into the air, take the controls and steer it. And it appears to greatly tragic effect. That's exactly what they did. So that is the latest report that we have from Kerry Sanders. We'll keep you up to date on his investigation in Florida, and an investigation that is going on in Florida, in Boston, and around the world. We also heard the German police are now involved. Let's go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell and see if she has anything additional to add.
The flight that was hijacked, or one or both of the flights that were hijacked out of Boston. And we heard from John Ashcraft, the Attorney General, last night when he was briefing members of Congress, that 3 to 5 hijackers were on each plane. So gradually, actually fairly rapidly, I think, the FBI is putting together a pretty good picture of what might have taken place and of how they were making these connections. The involvement of the German police just tells you how global this concern is. Colin Powell told me this morning that he's been on the phone with leaders around the world. We know that the Pakistanis have sent a military delegation to Afghanistan and that they are being tasked. Our intelligence colleagues in Pakistan are being told that they've got to prove that they've got some influence over Afghanistan to try to ferret out better information about where the U.S. can find Osama bin Laden. Tom?
Andrea Mitchell, can you tell us about any diplomatic initiative plans that are under consideration at the State Department?
You bet. There's a possibility that Colin Powell would be traveling, but initially what he is doing is talking to leaders around the world. And we are getting very interesting help from a couple of unlikely places, Russia and China. Perhaps not so unlikely by people like you, Tom, who know the nuances of foreign policy, because Russia obviously has a long-standing, many decades grievance against Afghanistan and would like nothing better than to take some steps with intelligence through shared borders and the like that would help the U.S. in some sort of retaliatory mode if that is the direction they're going. China, because of their concern about some of these terror groups and unrest in that very complicated country, and their concern about keeping control and security control over their citizenry. So there are a number of nations. I was just talking to the Prime Minister of Australia the other day, who was talking about their concern about people coming through Manila who might be influenced by bin Laden or under bin Laden's control, trying to create terror seeds in Australia, some 1,500 miles away from the most previously known outposts of bin Laden's empire in the Philippines and in Indonesia. So there is quite a global reach, and that is the kind of thing that Powell and others and other agencies are trying to accomplish.
All right, thank you very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now, who's keeping track of aviation developments. There had been some thought that planes would be allowed to take off at around noon Eastern time today. Obviously, we have passed that deadline. Most of the majors are saying it will be 6 or later before they begin to fly. Midway, which was a highly valued airline in the Midwest, until the economic times took a tumble, it has gone out of business today, Bob tells us. Bob, what is the latest on scheduled flights from the major carriers?
Well, as you say, the last time we talked, they were all over the lot. Some carriers were going to try to get back in the air after 6 o'clock tonight. Others just weren't going to try it. Now the FAA has laid down the rules, so we know the operation at this point. They're essentially grounding all U.S. air traffic, throwing in the towel for a second day now, with one important exception. Flights that were diverted yesterday can continue on to their original destinations today, but they'll only be allowed to take passengers that were on that original flight that had been diverted and then have to be carried to their original destination. There's one other exception. Airlines can move empty aircraft to get them into position to resume operations tomorrow, so that's an important break for airlines. Give an example on that interrupted flight or diverted flight exception that the FAA is allowing. So let's say a plane was flying from Denver, scheduled to Washington or New York, and those airports were both closed after the initial hits at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So that flight to Denver would not have been allowed into, from Denver, wouldn't have been allowed into Washington or New York, its intended destination. Let's say it diverted to Columbus, Ohio. Well, under these rules, the passengers that were on that flight and now need to get from Columbus to their original destinations could at this point. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, Robert Hager. We're going to go to one of the busiest airports in the nation, and that is, of course, Chicago.
Not be definitive. We've talked to one doctor who's made a tour of what he describes as a 10-block area. We caution ourselves that in circumstances like this, there are often in earthquake situations people buried beneath the rubble who indeed may have survived. The mayor of New York has made that case several times. So has ABC's Bill Blakemore, who's covered so many situations similar but not like this before. But Dr. Feldman's remarked that they are not reaching the living, and he has not managed to talk to anyone who disagrees with him in that 10-mile area, and this constant stream of pictures giving us a greater sense of clarity as every hour goes by. That's very touching. I'm not quite sure what he's going to do with that American flag, but maybe we just follow him as far as we can for a second. We noticed on the Pentagon early this morning that in the particular part of the Pentagon which had been attacked, the rescue and research workers, it's up there on the upper right-hand side above over that gash. Someone had raised an American flag. I don't know whether we saw it last night or tonight. We're joined now by Dr. Stephen Warner, who is the... beg your pardon, my notes say differently. Dr. Stephen Garner, who is the Chief Medical Officer at St. Vincent's Hospital, and St. Vincent's is a hospital that just has gone flat out since the very beginning of this. Am I right? It's Dr. Garner?
Yes, Dr. Steve Garner.
Hi, Dr. Garner, and thank you for taking the time.
Planes, they did obtain pilot licenses from his company,
And then they took them to use them for turbo training access, meaning training for more powerful planes. Apparently, the FBI contacted the owner of Huffman Aviation about 2:30 Eastern Time this morning asking for information. Now, apparently, after completing their training at Huffman Aviation, these two men went to jet training near Pompano Beach in southeast Florida. They left Huffman Aviation back in November. One of the suspects, it appears, according to the owner of this company, was from Afghanistan. They don't know the nationality of the other men, or the other man, rather. Okay, more information as we continue to talk to our correspondents and check around the country for more updates. Boston, also a big problem here. Well, perhaps it may be the beginning of a solution. Law enforcement converging on the Westin Hotel in the Back Bay of Boston. A short while ago, they had some link, they had information, this according to the Associated Press, that at least one of the hijackers on one of those two flights hijacked out of Boston may have stayed at the Westin Hotel in Boston. They went into that room. We want to show you some videotape from a short while ago where it appears, it's hard to tell, but it looks like somebody is being led out by law enforcement. We don't want to jump to any conclusions here. It's just that it is noteworthy videotape to show you. We're going to try to pull that up. Again, here we go. There's the videotape. You see police. You see the back of the van. Law enforcement getting into the back of the van. Now, according to some eyewitnesses, they saw police, law enforcement, put someone else, a civilian, into the back of that van. Let us listen in to an eyewitness right now.
Soon after the bomb sniffing dog went in, a couple of the bomb squad guys came out, came back in with cameras and tools. I don't
Cameras?
know
Fiber optic stuff?
I don't
Did you tell?
I couldn't tell that. It was in a box.
What was going through your mind when you were seeing all this?
That I should probably walk away.
What's your name?
Travis Johnson. Thank you.
Okay, a little more information coming in. Senior correspondent Rita Cosby has been working with her law enforcement sources to find out more about what law enforcement is doing in Boston right now. Rita?
Well, Linda, I can tell you one law enforcement official telling me that they did go to that Westin Hotel. The actual room itself, they said, was vacant, but they said that they did get some important information from the room. I wasn't quite sure, gleaning from that, if it was physical information, i.e. maybe some paperwork or some other documents. They said there was physically no one inside, but there were some things left behind that could be helpful, according to one law enforcement source. Apparently, what led them there was a name on a manifest that they were able to sort of connect to what they believe was one of the hijackers. And also, Fox News has learned that law enforcement sources are now saying that they have identified about a dozen people believed to be involved in the hijacking. And we are told that these are people who actually participated in the hijacking itself. Law enforcement officials were saying that they thought about 3 to 5 people per plane were involved in the hijacking, obviously four planes involved. So you do the math, if they say that they have about a dozen, that sounds to be quite accurate based on what we're hearing before. But law enforcement sources are telling me that they have identified about a dozen people believed to be physically involved in the hijacking. This is in terms of identification of them. And many of them were told that the names came from the manifest, that they were actually able to go through the manifest. Some of the names actually rang.
Had decided to get out of the car and continue to walk towards my office. Merrill's offices are across the street, and in my mind out of harm's way. I was still far enough away where the impact of the first explosion didn't appear to be as ominous as in fact it was, and proceeded again towards my office, at which time about 6 blocks later the second explosion occurred. I was rather sheltered from that explosion as the plane had come from the south, so I saw the outward explosion but did not see the plane impact the building. At that point it did appear to me to be not only extraordinarily dangerous but probably terrorist activity. My first concern was in fact still to get to the office rather than turn about face and go in the other direction. And it wasn't, in fact, until I was very close, just about opposite to the World Trade Center, I saw an exodus of many of my colleagues, both at Merrill and many people from Lehman Brothers, a building adjacent, going in the opposite direction.
Mr. Crosby, let me just ask you quickly, you have colleagues in the building that you have not been able to account for?
Our building, Merrill Lynch has no employees in the World Trade Center. We are located in the World Financial Center across the street. And I'm just about to get on a 3 o'clock call to see whether everybody is sound, and as far as I understand, everybody is within our immediate group, and we're going to know more. But our building is off limits for a period of time.
What's your understanding about when the markets may reopen?
We have no news at this point. I think what we're focused
are ones that were diverted yesterday and ones that need to travel for bereavement purposes. So we will see a limited amount of flights. And now let's go to my colleague, Britt Hume, who's also here
Rita,
in Washington.
Rita, just following up on that, the Transportation Secretary, as you noted, is going to allow passengers aboard flights that were diverted yesterday, and thus these people are stranded